everybody ready?
I think we are ready to go.
Morning. I will call to order the March 18th meeting of the San Joaquin Valley Unified Air Pollution Control District. Given the, would you like for me to read that, Michelle?
Sure, if you wouldn't mind, or I can read it.
Given the international COVID-19 pandemic and consistent with the California Department of Public Health's recommendations and Governor Newsom's executive orders in 2520 and in 2920, the meeting will be held via video teleconference, and the district's governing board chambers will be closed to the public generally. Only those members of the public who cannot participate virtually. So Michelle, I'm on my phone and it's it won't open up. So can I get you to read the rest of it?
Absolutely. I'll just go ahead and read the opening comments. Sure. So good morning. Welcome to our meeting of the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District Governing Board. We have board members participating in person and via Zoom webinar. We'll do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation via Zoom and webcast. Before we begin, here are some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell phone. This will ensure that we are not hearing any feedback that can interrupt the meeting. During the meeting, all public participants, except for board members and staff, will be placed on mute by the host. Public members will not be able to mute or unmute manually. Only the board members and staff will be visible on Zoom. Audio for members of the public will be unmuted once they are recognized to make a public comment for each item. And after each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment, and the clerk will recognize any public attendee who has indicated they wish to speak. And so item number 2 is roll call.
Roll.
Mr. Bessinger?
Here.
Mr. Chiesa?
Present.
Okay. Mr. Couch?
Here.
Ms. Fagazi?
Here.
Ms. Lewis? Mr. Mendez?
Here.
Dr. Pacheco Werner?
Here.
Mr. Pereira?
Present.
Mr. Preciado?
Here.
Mr. Reyes?
Present.
Mr. Rickman? Dr. Sheriffs?
Here.
Ms. Shuklian?
Here.
Mr. Wheeler?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? We have a quorum. Item number 3 is Pledge of Allegiance.
Director Souza, would you lead us to the pledge, please?
I would love to. Please stand if you can. Hand over your heart. Ready, salute. I pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item number 4 is approval of consent calendar items 14 through 19.
Okay. What is your pleasure of the board?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Michelle, did you get a motion maker in a second? Out of that, I couldn't hear.
I believe
Chiesa and Wheeler.
Chiesa and Wheeler, correct. Okay. And through the chair, we need to ask for public comment, so I will look. I do not see any public comment on this item on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Is there any comments from board members?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, hi, Vice Mayor Lewis. I think we are having a hard time hearing you. Can you, would you mind repeating that? We still can't hear. I see that you're not muted.
Are you looking for me?
No, I'm sorry, yes. So Vice Mayor Lewis had a comment, and we're just having a hard time hearing what she's saying.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, so I was just stating that I had trouble signing in. It's a little bit different format than my city, so I wanted to make sure that you know I was present.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so Supervisor Pereira, we can go ahead and with roll call. We don't have public comment. So if it's okay with you, I'll proceed.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Bessinger,
Yes.
Mr. Chiesa,
Yes.
Mr. Couch,
Yes.
Ms. Fagazi,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco Werner,
Yes.
Mr. Pereira, Mr. Pereira? Can you hear me, Supervisor Pereira? I think he froze. He might now. I'll come back. Mr. Preciado?
Yes.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Dr. Sheriffs?
Yes.
Ms. Shuklian?
Yes.
Mr. Wheeler?
Yes.
It looks like Supervisor Pereira might be back. Can you hear me?
I vote yes.
Thank you very much. Motion passes. Item number 5 is public comment. And so, I'm sorry. For members of the public, if you're participating on Zoom video conference, please press participants button at the bottom of your screen and then the raise hand button at the bottom of the participants list so that you may be recognized to speak. If you're participating on Zoom audio conference, please press *9 so that you may be recognized to speak, and also *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please be prepared to speak when your name or the last 4 digits of your phone number are called. Please state your name prior to beginning public comment. Looks like I have several requests, so we'll begin with Connie Young.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
yes,
can
we
hear
can.
you.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'm Connie Young, a Fresno resident, retired registered nurse, and volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, also known as CCL. Thank you for moving forward with ending ag burning. Not only will it improve our air quality, but it will reduce the production of greenhouse gases that are driving climate change. Next week, hundreds of CCL volunteers, including yours truly, will be meeting with their members of Congress to lobby for putting a price on carbon emissions. CCL prefers a form of carbon pricing known as carbon fee and dividend. It forms the basis of the Energy Innovation Act. Carbon pricing is a market-based solution to climate change. Recently, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce announced its support for a market-based approach to accelerate the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions across the U.S. economy. Furthermore, the American Petroleum Institute supports economy-wide carbon pricing as the primary governmental policy to reduce CO2 emissions. Who else supports carbon pricing? Locally, both the Central California Environmental Justice Network and the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition have endorsed the Energy Innovation Act, or carbon fee and dividend. This demonstrates that diverse interest groups can get behind putting a price on carbon pollution for a more stable climate and for cleaner air. By gradually making fossil fuels more expensive, such a policy would incentivize California's shift towards electrification. A recent study published in Geophysical Research Letters looked at CO2 emissions in the Bay Area during the 6 weeks before and 6 weeks during the pandemic stay-at-home order. It found that there was a 48% reduction in traffic-related CO2 emissions while the order was in place. These findings provide insight into the reductions in CO2 and, by extension, other harmful tailpipe emissions that we'll enjoy when we switch to clean, quiet electric vehicles. as a steadily rising price on carbon makes fossil fuels more expensive. The demand for EVs will increase, and our vehicles and our air will become much cleaner. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Janet Dietzkameh.
Good morning, Chair and board members. This is Janet Dietzkameh, and I would like to address climate change. I'm concerned that there still seem to be those who don't acknowledge there is climate change. I'd like to point out that we are now having weather patterns that are changing and have been noticeably changing for at least 15, 20 years. We have ever increasing extreme weather events causing flooding, tornadoes, ice and snowstorms that affected even Texas all the way down to the Gulf. We need to observe that there are events that are out of the norm and need to be recognized. Scientists have been warning us of the climate change for years and years. And they did predict through modeling how fast we would be affected by climate change. But climate change is happening much faster than the modeling showed. We need to address climate change. We need to do everything possible to slow down the weather pattern changes that are due to climate change, including our hot summers, each one getting hotter than the last, our drier air, our trees that are not hydrated. When one drives through the fields and hills, one can see that the trees that used to thrive are now dying. And I'm referring to the oak trees, the indigenous oak trees. And so there we have our climate change tragedy of wildfires due to the changes in climate from climate change. Thank you.
Next, we have Nate Note.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Okay. I wanted to speak about the AB 617, but if I'm supposed to wait until that agenda item comes up, I can do that.
Yeah, that would be fine.
So I wait for that to come up later in the meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have the phone number ending in 1589. Hi, I believe you are on mute. So if you can press star 6.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Yeah, we hear.
Hi, this is Supervisor Rickman. I'm having some technical difficulties, so I happen to call in on this number.
Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and label you in and move you over as a panelist. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you.
Next is Matt Holmes.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I just wanted to chime in and say looking forward to the rest of the board meeting and here to just signal an endorsement from community members in Stockton for the 617 emission reduction plan. We submitted written comments. We're here to do our part to help with the rolling implementation phase of that Serp. There was obviously a significant hiccup with one of the major emission reduction strategies of the Port of Stockton. Valley Air has a tough row to hoe with implementing this peculiar process with so many different agencies and partners. And so, I understand that, it was difficult to do something that wasn't within your jurisdiction. And so I think the the tone of my written comments is really that the longer we're involved, the more we can help address those types of issues and bring the political power and influence to this Valley Air Board that we need to bring about the scientific-based public health impact that this agency was designed to deliver. So I know it was a messy process, and I personally probably didn't make it very easy, but I know that I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Valley Air. And so this is my partnership, and we have a mutual purpose to bring about a public health revolution here in the Central Valley, and I'm here to help you knock on the doors of Sacramento and the Bay Area and Los Angeles. And with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, through the chair, I do not see any additional public comments for this item.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to item 6.
Okay.
Report on Safety Advisory Committee.
And we are looking for Kevin Abernathy scheduled to give the presentation. I do not see him on Zoom.
Kevin, are you on? Okay, how about if we move to item 7 and then we'll come back to item 6 if Kevin is able to join in.
Sounds great, thank you. So item number 7 is receive and file district's annual air toxics report for 2020.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the board. My name is Morgan Lambert. I'm one of the Deputy Air Pollution Control Officers here at the district, and I'll be giving this morning's report. Each year, the district publishes an air toxics report, and as in past years, this report continues a very positive story about the tremendous reductions in toxic air contaminants that have been seen here in the valley over the last several decades. But before we talk about air toxics, we first need to understand what they are. The state and federal governments have identified a great number of compounds that, when suspended in the air, can end up in your body and can cause risk to your health. The federal government calls them hazardous air pollutants, and the state government calls them toxic air contaminants, but they are all air toxics. Some of the more common air toxics that you might have heard about are things like diesel, exhaust particulates, dioxins, or asbestos. Now, these pollutants are not the same as the criteria pollutants that your board deals with more often, those for which EPA has adopted or established national ambient air quality standards like nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, PM2.5. But it's important to understand that small quantities of air toxics are distributed throughout the air that we all breathe, and they get created by cars, trucks, stationary sources, and even the gas-burning appliances that we may have in our homes. So what does the Air District do about these air toxics? Well, quite a lot, actually. And the district runs an integrated air toxics program combining local, state, and federal requirements under one umbrella that allows us to fold a number of streamlining and efficiency measures into what can be an overwhelming number of regulations that applies to air toxics. We implement a state law called the Air Toxics Hotspots Program that addresses risk from air toxics from existing operations within the valley. We evaluate new sources of air toxic emissions to make sure that we do not allow new health risk situations to be created from these new emissions. We help land use agencies address, reduce, and mitigate potential air toxic risks from new development projects under the California Environmental Quality Act. And we implement a large number of regulations designed to reduce risk from air toxics on a regional basis as well. I'll touch on each of these areas a little bit more over the next few minutes, but let's start with AB 2588, the Air Toxics Hotspot Information and Assessment Act. Under this state law, the Air Toxics Hotspot Program, existing facilities are required to first submit a plan to quantify their air toxic emissions, and then, after the plan is approved by the district, they implement the plan and report their air toxic emissions to the Air District. The district then uses a screening model to decide which facilities do not create a health risk and those that may create a health risk. The latter facilities are described as high priority facilities. Not because they do, in fact, create a health risk, but because they may, and when the district needs to do further analysis to further quantify and understand the risks that these facilities may create. These high priority facilities have to do quite a bit of work in order to assess and to quantify and report their risk. First, they have to use district and state guidance to perform complex computer modeling of their potential to create health risk. And then they must submit that modeling to the district for our analyses. And if their toxic risk is high enough to exceed our action triggering thresholds, they may have to hold public meetings to inform their neighbors of the risk they are creating. And the highest risk facilities have to reduce the risk to a point where they are no longer create a significant health risk to the surrounding community. We have, as far as like a historic look back, because this program has been in place since about the 80s, we have over the last 3 decades of the program quantified air toxic emissions from about 6,000 facilities. We had originally conducted 29 health risk assessments of the highest priority facilities under the program using those complex computer models I just talked about. And historically, we've had about 156 so-called intermediate priority facilities that are obligated under the program to continue to provide emissions information every 4 years so they can continue to be assessed and ensure that they haven't risen to be a high priority facility. As a result of the public notification requirements of the program, we have hosted several public meetings in neighborhoods around facilities and have provided a forum for facility operators to explain their operations and detail any plans to reduce toxic emissions. And while there were originally 16 facilities in the valley that were determined to create a potentially high risk, we have worked with those sources to reduce emissions so that as we sit today, there are no longer any high-risk facilities identified under the Hotspots program anywhere in the valley. These facilities actually took steps to reduce their air toxic emissions. Refineries started burning natural gas rather than heavy crude to run their heating systems. Oil fields installed vapor recovery systems that reduced hydrogen sulfide emissions. Fumigation operations modified their processes and switched out fumigants in some cases, as well as put on control equipment as well. These are the kinds of things that facilities have done to reduce air toxic emissions in the valley. And because of these efforts and the many other efforts to reduce emissions of air toxics that we'll discuss today, we've seen a reduction of around 90% in cancer risk from breathing the air in the San Joaquin Valley since the 1990s, which is, obviously very significant. Now, currently, to kind of get up to speed with where we're at now with the Air Toxics Hotspots program, in 2015, the State Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, OEHA, amended their Air Toxics Hotspots program guidance. And in response to those changes, the board adopted a new health risk assessment policy in July of 2015. And we are now going through a multi-year process to use the new risk methodologies and calculations as required under state law to assess thousands of districts' permitted facilities under the 2588 Air Toxics Hotspots regulation. Virtually every permitted source of emissions in the valley will have to go through this reassessment, and that's over about 14,000 facilities we're currently working through. We're implementing the schedule that is contained in the law's implementing regulations, starting with the larger sources of criteria pollutants, those over 25 tons per year of any particular pollutant in Phase 1, those between 10 and 25 tons in Phase 2, and those under 10 tons in Phase 3, and then the smallest sources under Phase 4 of our approach. The Phase 3 and Phase 4 facilities demand fewer resources per facility, but there are a lot of them, as you can see on this list here. These last two phases start with an applicability determination based on a screening analysis, and only a small percentage of these facilities is expected to actually have to submit plans and reports based on the statewide guidance that's currently there. We have already completed the reassessments of approximately 4,800 facilities under this new reassessment, and established currently that none of them are creating a significant risk to Valley residents, and that's a great thing. And as you can kind of see here, the numbers that kind of outline that 4,800, we've determined that 2,800, almost 2,900 of the facilities that have been reassessed to date are exempt under the state guidelines because their emissions are very low and or they don't have certain types of toxic compounds that they emit. We've conducted approximately 2,000 prioritizations, which is that kind of first level of screening. Of those, roughly 1,200 of those are what are so-called low priority facilities or prioritization facilities. Those kind of fall out of the regulations and don't have to do any more work unless they're modified in the future. There's been 675 intermediate priority facilities that have been identified. Those facilities will continue to have to report emissions on an ongoing basis every 4 years to us for us to continue to evaluate and monitor those. And then there, there were 97 so-called high priority facilities. And for those high priority facilities, we've completed the more in-depth computer modeled health risk assessments for 63 of those facilities. And once we've done that more refined screening under the health risk, 15 of those high priority facilities are actually low risk facilities, and an additional 48 of those are intermediate risk facilities. And so to date, none of them have risen to the level of being a high risk facility. Now there are currently 34 ongoing health risk assessments that we are working with the facilities to complete. And as we complete those health risk assessments, we submit those to OEHA for their review as well and their concurrence with the findings. We also analyze the potential health risks of new and modified sources. We actually do this for every single operation for which we are proposing to issue a permit. And if that operation will emit any amount of air toxics, we go through a streamlined process that we call the risk management review. So this process, similar to under 2588, we first go through kind of a screening process to determine which operations which projects rise to the level of having to do a more formal and full resource-intensive health risk assessment and computer modeling on all of those. And that's a very sophisticated set of modeling that looks at all the different quantity, the toxicity, the meteorological conditions, the pathways at which those toxins can get into the human body. It's very complicated modeling that goes into that. In each case, all these assumptions that are used in the modeling that's used is very conservative. We look at worst case potential emissions, the worst stagnant air conditions, the highest emissions possible. The length of the exposure is very long in many of the cases. But at the end, the result is always the same. Facilities have to propose best available controls for toxic emissions. And if the operation cannot pass the risk assessment with those emission controls, then it is not an approvable project. In the rare case that we end up in that situation, we work diligently with the facilities to find other ways to reduce their risk until they're no longer significant and we can ultimately issue the permit. We also implement a large number of regulations that are aimed at specific types of facilities or operations to further reduce air toxic emissions in the valley. Through our permitting and inspection processes, the district is responsible for implementing local, state, and federal rules and regulations that reduce air toxics. Our own district rules are designed to simplify state and federal regulations and implement them in a way that achieves the reductions, but in a way that the impact to valley stakeholders is minimized if possible. The state regulations that we implement are called Air Toxic Control Measures, or ATCMs, and apply to a fairly wide variety of sources. We provided a short list here of some of them, from dry cleaners, chrome platers, diesel engines, but there's a whole host of other source categories and compounds that these ATCMs regulate. And the federal regulations are generally called MACT standards, or maximum achievable control technology. There are currently about 150 of them altogether for everything from aerospace coatings to wood preserving. And because your board has focused the district's incentive grant programs on sources of emission reductions that bring about public health benefits, large reductions in air toxic emissions have occurred as well, directly as a result of your board's investment in clean air projects. The most prominent example is the multitude of emission reduction grant programs aimed at diesel emissions and diesel engines. Whether we've been replacing or retrofitting trucks, tractors, buses, ag irrigation engines, whatever, we've done so to the tune of about 2,800 diesel engines to date in the programs. And we reduced over 189,000 tons of emissions, reducing over 6,000 tons of diesel exhaust particulate matter. And diesel exhaust particulate is one of the most potent carcinogenic air toxics, so reductions in diesel particulate are critical to reducing the public's health risk. And this integrated approach to reducing air toxics has been successful. We've seen about a 70% decrease in diesel particulate matter emissions in just the past decade and a half in the San Joaquin Valley. And as I said, diesel particulate is responsible for the large majority of airborne cancer risk in the valley and across the state, as displayed in the chart that I showed you a little bit earlier today. And along the way, we've developed the district into a state and national leader in modeling of air toxics. Both the California Air Resources Board and Region 9 of the federal EPA have designed classes that will teach other districts and consultants how to use the modeling tools that the district has developed. We've placed these tools on our website for all to access and use, including land use agencies that use these tools to make sure that no significant risk is created by land use decisions under CEQA. And we've also developed streamlined emission reporting tools so that most facilities can report their air toxic emissions simultaneously with their annual criteria emission reporting that's required. And as we implement the revised OEHA guidelines, we implemented a whole new suite of cost-cutting and streamlining tools. We've significantly reduced the resources required to implement AB 2588 for both the district and the regulated businesses, so that. And I'll give you a couple of examples here in the next few bullets of this slide. First, AB 2588 requires that facilities send us a plan that tells us how they will assess their air toxic emissions from their facilities. And back in the 80s, when this all first started, this was a huge task, and the time it took for facilities to do this was extensive. There was not a lot of information available on toxic emissions at the time. And there was not a lot available information on how to actually implement the regulation. And so these plans called toxic emission inventory plans were the district and facilities really the introduction to AB 2588, and it wasn't a pretty thing back in the 1980s. Fast forward 30 years, and the district has invested a lot of time and energy in making sure that history doesn't repeat itself. We've created from our own databases facility-specific pre-populated plan templates that significantly reduce the time and resources needed for facilities to compile the required information to submit as part of the plan. We've also introduced a streamlined electronic information submittal system to speed up the process, place the data directly into our internal electronic databases, and to make the information submittal uniform in format, which drastically reduces the district staff time needed to evaluate the plans. Then fast forward a year after the plan is approved, they have to submit a toxic emissions inventory report to us. Again, the district has been providing the facility with their own electronic access portals to use for this process. We prepare, based on the facility's plan, the information already in our databases, a facility-specific toxic emissions inventory report. Now, keep in mind that this process cost many companies hundreds of thousands of dollars back in the late 1980s. If they choose to use the district's forms and processes this time around, they should be saving significant time and money in complying with the requirements. And we have been making our website a major resource for screening and modeling tools as we make these available to industry consultants and cities and counties for use as well. We also have a large compilation of air toxic information and emissions calculators for specific types of industries and equipment available on our website. And as we go through the process of reassessing thousands of permitted facilities under the final phases of our reassessment of air toxic hotspots facilities, we will be offering the majority of them the opportunity to use an online tool to streamline the applicability determinations for their facility. This is going to drastically reduce the facility's resource needs to comply with AB 2588 and will similarly reduce the district's resource needs as well as speeding up the process so that the information can be transmitted and out to the public as necessary. We'll also be working with stakeholders within the San Joaquin Valley to understand air toxics and achieve reductions in toxic emissions. For instance, we regularly work with stakeholders to understand our role in permitting processes and understand the concept of and the conservative nature of risk analyses. We provide bilingual notices of all permitting projects and bilingual notifications under AB 2588 if and when we find significant risk sources. And we've also had an important role in helping businesses understand and comply with the many air toxics rules and requirements that may impact their operations. We always work directly with applicants who need assistance in reducing their potential air toxic impacts from new sources of emissions, and we continue to expand our ability to assist land use agencies in the Valley to deal with toxic impacts under CEQA. And under the umbrella of AB 617, the state has a new regulatory proposal, or now adopted but with some amendments coming, to require facilities to report their annual air toxic emissions, as well as their criteria emissions, in a more comprehensive manner that has been required by state regulations in the past. We've been working hard with the state to make sure that their new rule is compatible with emissions inventory processes that the district is already implementing, and we have ensured that business entities in the valley are informed of the new process and new proposed state regulations. And with that, we ask your board to receive and file this annual air toxics report to the community and authorize staff to distribute the report to county boards of supervisors, city councils, and local health officers as required under the state hotspots legislation. So with that, we'll be open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you for that report. Are there board?
Through the chair, I do see a request. Dr. Pacheco-Werner?
Thank you so much for your presentation and this great tool that I'm sure will be greatly used by others as well. I do have one question. If you can walk me through how, in your new ways in which you're assessing to comply with this reassessment strategy, how you're assessing non-cancer risks as well. I do know that OECA specifies a couple of breathing-related ones, so I'm just wondering how those are integrated into our new assessment.
Yeah, and so there's basically two pathways on assessing risk. One is actually we have thresholds that have been developed for the state for assessing cancer risk, and then there's the so-called there's the other non-cancer related chronic risk as well that we both assess on an acute basis, which we're looking at 1 hour exposures to determine whether or not they exceed thresholds and they have to be evaluated, as well as on a chronic level as well, which is lifetime exposure, and that exposure time frame kind of depends based on the different compounds that there are. But those are both part of the assessment. They're part of the tools that have been developed with the state, and they're part of our process. As we go through the process, we pull in those chemicals as well and assess them on that as well. And depending on what the thresholds are, they may trigger the public notification or risk reductions as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Through the chair. Yeah, I see no additional board member comments on this item.
Can we go to public comment?
We do have public comment on this item. Okay. Mr. Cunha?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, super. Okay. Again, I can't wait for us to get back in physical form into that building. This high technology is really taxing me a lot. But Mr. Chairman and board members and staff, I just want to acknowledge we were one of those groups back in the late 90s, early 90s, dealing with 2588 toxic hotspots under many of the ARB staff and working with issues and all of this stuff. And I'll make a comment, maybe some of the staff will remember. We were talking about the crematorium of dogs and cats. That was an item that came up, and how those emissions. So you can see where those items way back then became an item for 2588. But I want to thank the staff, Samir, and the past directors that have APCOs that have run the Air District. You've done a great job. And to hear again, San Joaquin Valley out in front with models that are sharing to the rest of the country and to the rest of the air districts, just like your study agency did a bunch of research on PM10 and 2.5. Again, models from the San Joaquin Valley. And I want to acknowledge that, thank the board for giving the latitude and allowing our staff to do what they've done. And we've come a long way, Morgan, and that was a tremendous report. And the reductions are really headed in the right direction of everything you guys do. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you, Samir, and all your staff for the hard work on this item. Appreciate it very, very much.
Next, we have Janet Dietzkameh.
Thank you. I appreciate that this effort is being done. It is important that everything possible can be done to reduce the pollutants in our air. Many people are still being sickened by San Joaquin Valley air. We have more and more industry and businesses coming to the valley, a lot of them coming to Fresno. Now, as you had data collection on the cancer reductions, I would love to see data collection on information on the numbers of ER or doctor visits for asthma attacks with dates of increases throughout the year of these medical visits, establishing that would establish trends through the year of asthma attacks and emergency room visits and the effects of the air on the people who live here. I think that information is extremely critical in making decisions and in coming up with programs to make this air safe to breathe. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Through the chair, I see no further public comment on this item.
Mr. Vice Chair, just wanted to, as Samir, just wanted to note that I think this would be an action item by the board. So I think a motion, a second, and action would be appropriate to authorize staff to take the move forward with the recommendations.
Move to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Dr. Sharif with the motion, and who seconded it?
Wheeler.
Wheeler. All right, thank you. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Bessinger?
Yes.
Mr. Chiesa?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Ms. Fugazi?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco Werner?
Yes.
Mr. Pereira?
Yes.
Mr. Preciado?
Yes.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Mr. Rickman?
Yeah.
Dr. Sheriffs?
Yes.
Ms. Shuklian? Ms. Shuklian? Can you hear me? Mr. Wheeler?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item number 8 is authorize Executive Director, APCO, to enter into agreements with San Joaquin Valley Chambers of Commerce to implement energy efficiency programs for a total amount not to exceed $50,000.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board. I'm Tom Jordan, the Senior Policy Advisor at the Air District. Back in 2010, the District Governing Board adopted the Regional Energy Efficiency Strategy. That strategy was part of an effort called the Fast Track plan to look for non-regulatory ways that we could reduce emissions by working with other folks on initiatives that would reduce emissions and have other co-benefits. One of those efforts was to work with the Stockton Chamber of Commerce to share their award-winning Green Team program, where they work with businesses to look at ways they can reduce energy usage, enhance recycling, and other things through their through outreach strategies. So we contracted with the Stockton Chamber. They went and met with other chambers throughout the valley, and so we've had success in the past with chambers adopting these activities. Over the past year, the Stockton Chamber and the Modesto Chamber of Commerce have instituted Green Team programs. It was a challenging year for these activities. Chambers have had a lot of headwinds with the current business climate and with being remote access. Both chambers were successful at modifying their programs and operating in a remote fashion. In Stockton, they've had monthly meetings with 35 to 45 people in attendance. They've had 2 virtual conferences to highlight activities businesses can implement and to assist businesses with environmental compliance, including with Air District regulations. In Modesto, the Modesto Chamber actually enhanced their program by establishing a green business certification program that they've been operating remotely over the past year. We also did outreach to other chambers, but I think that effort was hampered due to the climate we were working in. So adoption of this item today will allow us to redouble those efforts and continue that outreach and see if we can expand this activity. One of the big benefits of this program is it's not regulators talking to business, it's business talking to business. So I think we can achieve emission reductions that we might not be able to get through a more regulatory or government-based approach. So approval of the item today would set aside $50,000. It would be up to $10,000 per chamber, and the district would continue that outreach, enter in agreements with the signature of the chair to allow these activities to continue. I have talked to both the Modesto Chamber and Stockton Chamber. They're interested in continuing for another year, and we will continue to outreach to other chambers to see if we can expand these activities.
Is that it?
Yep.
Michelle, does any board member?
Yes, Dr. Sheriffs.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan, for your presentation, and thanks to staff for re-energizing this program. It's been a fantastic opportunity for the district to collaborate with chambers. Great to support the chambers in this work. What a win-win for everybody in the Valley in terms of being able to advocate for efficiencies, which really have positive impacts in terms of emissions, both criteria pollutants, toxics, and also climate change pollutants. So great program. I guess my question would be, when do we hear back about this, and what kind of criteria are we suggesting for these chambers so that they know what the expectations in terms of achievements are? What are the measures of achievement? And I really hope they're going to come back next year and be looking at funding more chambers and increased funding. Thoughts about criteria of success.
So as we do the outreach to the chambers, we usually basically talk to them about what's been done in the Stockton Chamber and the Modesto Chamber of Commerce. Frank Farrell, in particular, at the Stockton Chamber, has been willing to talk to them about. He's been doing this for a long time, about kind of the activities they do, and as we go through that contracting process, we're able to kind of work with them. They're all going to be a little bit unique because they'll have different processes, but on how they're going to go about demonstrating that they're reducing energy usage and other things with their businesses, and sharing some of those best practices that have been done by Stockton and Modesto over the years as they move forward. We do have a couple of chambers that we think are interested, and we'll start talking to them. And hopefully, have some more to bring back to you this next year as well.
Mr. Vice Chair, just want to add a few more comments. This is Samir. I think what we can do is perhaps profile this in our annual report to the community, and kind of use it as a good example of a great story of collaboration. I also think that it's important to acknowledge that while this funding is important, there really is significant, match commitment by a chamber in wanting to run a program like this. So when we go out there and we do the outreach with the many chambers throughout the Valley, what we're trying to convince them to see and to do is to really make that commitment. I mean, our funding is just a really seed funding. They would have to allocate a person, resources, energy well beyond the funding that we would provide. But there is returns on that too. I think the business community, where it's worked really well, really see the value in being able to show and demonstrate that they're implementing these green practices. There's a positivity that continues to grow, in my opinion, over time as we all sort of march in that direction. So I just wanted to note that there is a commitment, by the chambers, and what we're trying to do, especially with the help of people like Frank Farrell, is really just show them that there's enough of a value proposition in this, well beyond the seed funding that we may be able to provide that really is worth them pursuing these types of programs. And there's a lot of chamber leads out there. I got to tell you that we continue to pursue, where I think we're on the cusp with working with some individual chambers that I'm really excited. Hopefully we'll be able to replicate some of these models in other parts of the Valley, and we'll keep reporting out on that. I think the annual report's a great place to showcase that. And of course, we'll come back to the board as well in the future with where we are on this.
Okay, thank you. Any other board member comments?
Through the chair, I see no additional board member comments on this item. I also wanted to announce that Chairman Peterson has joined the meeting.
Well, I will let you take over, Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, thank you, Vice Chair, for covering for me here. And just so staff knows, in IT, I listened to webcasts on the way up, and it's loud and clear. It was like I was sitting actually sitting in the chamber. I was really amazed. But okay. So further board member questions?
No further board member comments. We can check for public comment on this item, and I do not see any hands raised for public comment as well.
Okay. So,
Motion to approve.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Bessinger?
Yes.
Mr. Chiesa?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Yes.
Ms. Fugazi?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco Werner?
Yes.
Mr. Pereira?
Yes.
Mr. Preciado?
Yes.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Mr. Rickman?
Yes.
Dr. Sheriffs?
Yes.
Ms. Shucklian?
Yes.
Mr. Wheeler?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 9 is adopt proposed community emissions reduction program for AB 617 community of Stockton.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Ryan Hayashi, Deputy Air Pollution Control Officer with the district. And today, it's my pleasure to be presenting the proposed community emission reduction program for AB 617 community of Stockton. For decades, the district has worked with Valley residents, businesses, agencies, residents, and other stakeholders to implement innovative clean air strategies to improve air quality. Numerous air quality plans and hundreds of regulations, stationary source emission reductions over 90% through significant investment by businesses and residents. It has resulted in the record air quality improvements in recent years. To address community level air quality concerns, the state enacted new community air protection program under AB 617 in 2017 as part of a legislative deal to extend cap and trade greenhouse gas program. AB 617 provides an opportunity for bringing additional clean air resources and attention to Valley communities and assisting with the district's ongoing clean air mission. In September 2018, your governing board approved the community emission reduction programs for the CARB selected Valley communities of South Central Fresno and Shafter. In December 2019, CARB added Stockton as an AB 617 community. The selection began a one-year process for the district to develop the community emission reduction program. Due to COVID-19 pandemic and at the request of the steering committee, we requested an extended deadline to March 31st of this year from CARB. Following board guidance, the district quickly established an inclusive community steering committee to serve in an advisory role in development of a community air monitoring plan and the community emission reduction program. And it's comprised of residents, local businesses, representatives, community advocates, and local governing bodies in the affected community. To the left is the picture of the Stockton community. It was selected by CARB to represent an urban residential area of the San Joaquin Valley. During the process, the boundary was expanded after consultation process with the committee and California Air Resources Board. It now includes Sierra Vista community on the eastern edge and Conway Holmes to the south. The community itself is about 16 square miles in size, includes a population of over 132,000 people, and has a CalEnviro screen overall score in the 98th percentile, which really shows the need for this type of program and the benefits that it brings. The percentile for poverty and unemployment ranges from the 80th to the 99th percentile, and it has an overall pollution burden over 90 in 90th percentile. Since January of last year, the district has conducted numerous community meetings with Stockton Community Steering Committee. Started with monthly meetings, then increased to every 2 weeks towards the end of last year. These meetings have been facilitated with ample opportunity for Community Steering Committee and public participation. We were the first in the state to transition to virtual meetings due to the pandemic, understanding the importance of this program and the benefits that it brings. The materials that we provided were multiple languages as requested, and we provided live streaming and recordings of the meetings, and were conducted, the Community Steering Committee meetings were evening meetings to ensure ample opportunity for full public engagement. So to the left was the kickoff meeting, and you really get an idea of the interest and the enthusiasm for the community for the program. And then to the right is the first meeting that we were able to have in the community. Very well attended, large community steering committee. Through this process, there was extensive community air quality education and interaction. This included the development of a new community webpage, which is developed with the committee and their input, and includes extensive information related to AB 617 efforts in the community, meeting information including agendas, presentations and supporting documentation, and educational resources and informational documents, including interactive maps, which identify mobile, stationary, and area sources of emissions and community-identified sources of concern in the community. So to the left is the image of the community-specific webpage, and just an example of us transitioning into our virtual meetings. Some of the community resources also include detailed emission inventories of mobile, stationary, and area-wide emission sources for PM 2.5, VOC, NOx, and air toxics. And some of these interactive maps with land use data, locations of facilities, schools, hospitals, and the air quality concerns identified by the committee members and the public. So through the process, we had engagement with the community steering committee members. We spent a lot of time trying to understand where the sources of concern were, and we used online tools to help us with that effort. And through that process, we identified the top sources of concern, which you can see there to the right, which includes trains and railroad emissions, motor vehicle idling, heavy-duty trucks, port operation, illegal trash burning, and industrial processes. In development of the proposed Stockton Community Emission Reduction Program, the district worked closely with the Community Steering Committee, California Air Resources Board, and community stakeholders, which includes the community members, community groups, regulated industry representatives, the City of Stockton, Port of Stockton, and other stakeholders. The AB 617 legislation requires that community emission reductions identify cost-effective measures to achieve emission reductions in the community. And the proposed Stockton Serp is the result of an extensive iterative process to address concerns and suggestions raised by the community. The proposed Stockton Serp conforms with the Community Air Protection Blueprint established by Carb as required by AB 617. While the district is tasked with adopting community reduction programs, the district has not provided any new authority under AB 617 and addressing community concerns under AB 617 involves coordination with a myriad of agencies with varying authorities. Land Use Authority, which rests with the cities, counties, and the Port of Stockton. Mobile Source Authority, which rests with the California Air Resources Board and the federal government. Transportation Authority, which rests with local metropolitan planning organizations, state and federal agencies. Rail and Locomotive Authority, which rests with the federal government. And Energy Authority, which rests with the Public Utilities Commission and the California Energy Commission and other state agencies. The proposed Stockton Community Emission Reduction Program includes a wide variety of clean air measures designed through a cooperative, community-driven process. The proposed Stockton Emission Reduction Program received unanimous support from the Community Steering Committee members and includes incentive-based strategies, which includes new and enhanced opportunities to promote effective clean air technologies and practices, exposure reduction strategies, including air filtration at schools and vegetative barriers, outreach and engagement strategies to improve air quality understanding in the community, partnerships with other agencies, including the California Air Resources Board, the cities, the counties, Caltrans, San Joaquin Council of Governments, and others, and regulatory strategies, which will require a public process and includes extensive existing stationary and mobile source regulations. Enforcement strategies, which are focused enforcement efforts for local and state regulations. And lastly, the Community Emission Reduction Program includes investment of $32 million in these clean air projects. And it's expected to reduce the NOx emissions by 698 tons, PM 2.5 by 66 tons, and VOC emissions by 53 tons. And at this point, I am going to turn these next few slides over to Jessica Olson, Program Manager.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As Ryan said, my name is Jessica Olson. I'm a program manager with the Air Quality Science and Planning Department. And I'm going to walk you through all of the measures that the Community Steering Committee worked with the district to include in the Serp, the Community Emission Reduction Program that's before you today. So this first slide shows community improvement measures. And so what we mean by that are measures that maybe reduce emissions from sources that are emitted in the community or protect close people in neighborhoods or in the community from sources that maybe are generated outside of the community. So the first two measures here are tree planting measures. The first one is incentives for the installation of vegetative barriers that would partner with tree planting organizations to plant trees that would block pollution from impacting the communities. And the second is a similar measure, also incentives for urban greening in the community. So rather than planting trees maybe in a barrier form, it's just planting trees throughout the community as identified and worked through with the steering committee and the tree planting organizations. The next two measures in this category are school measures. And these two measures really help to reduce impacts of pollution for the most vulnerable population, and those are children in schools. And so the first is incentives for installing air filtration in all of the public community schools within the community, so that's 33 schools in Stockton Unified School District. And the second is to increase participation in the district's Healthy Air Living Schools program, again, at all of the schools within the boundary. That next measure, IAQ1, is incentives for air filtration in homes. This was actually a unique measure to Stockton. It is not in the Serp in Fresno or in Shafter. This was identified by the community as a high priority measure to partner with weatherization organizations and air filtration organizations to install and improve air filtration at homes within the community. The next two measures are incentives for lawn and garden equipment, very similar to district programs, the first one being for residents and the second for commercial operators within the boundary. The difference between this and what is just our general district program, though, is for LG1. These are incentives that would pay for 100% of the cost of replacement of gas-powered with electric lawn and garden equipment. And then finally, in this category, O1 is multilingual outreach in the community. That's just really targeting and stepping up our typical district outreach with targeted social media campaigns, workshops, and then hopefully, once we can all be in person, some in-person outreach campaigns as well. This next category is really targeting older, higher polluting passenger cars within the community. That first one, TP1, is targeted tune-in, tune-up events. That would be in addition to the district's regularly scheduled tune-in, tune-up events. Again, all happening within the community boundary. The second is drive clean vehicle replacement. So this would be incentives funding of up to $800,000 directly for, exclusively for, I should just say, residents that reside within that community boundary. So targeted outreach to them as well as exclusive funding to them through the Serp or Community Emission Reduction Program implementation. TP3 is incentives for EV charging station, and in particular 15 stations installed within the community boundary. The fourth one is incentives for EV mechanic training. So this is partnership that we would establish with local community colleges and school districts to provide 10 trainings, so that's not 10 people, but 10 training opportunities within the community to increase capacity for electric vehicles within the community, and of course, create jobs and really a local workforce for that area of work. And then finally, incentives for a car share program, TP5. This would partner with car share organizations, provide up to $1 million to really get a car share program in the Stockton community to share electric vehicle resources, just in a different way than actually replacing their cars. They would share it, much like some of the programs we've brought before your board in the past. This next set of measures really targets the highest polluting sources within the community. Of course, that's heavy-duty mobile sources that operate within the community. The first one here was really one of the high priority measures from the Community Steering Committee, and that's funding for a truck reroute study, working in partnership with the city and the county and land use agencies within San Joaquin County, provide incentives funding to help support a study to understand truck routes in the community and study whether or not those routes can be changed to help mitigate or reduce impacts to the residents. The second is the incentives for heavy-duty truck replacement with zero and near-zero emissions technology, and that's $10 million for that measure. The third, HD3, is incentives for heavy-duty vehicle charging infrastructure. So this would be looking to partner to install vehicle charging infrastructure to support that transition to zero-emission heavy-duty trucks. HD4, incentives for truck idling plug-ins with up to $100,000 for that measure. HD6, incentives for school bus replacement with zero emission technology. And again, because we're targeting schools within that boundary, this is actually working directly with Stockton Unified School District to provide up to $4 million to replace trucks that operate within that boundary. And then HD7 is incentives for locomotive switcher replacement with clean technology, again, targeting locomotive switchers that operate mostly or primarily within the boundary. And that incentives funding is $6,800,000 for that measure. This next category, land use and urban sources, all of these measures really look to partner with those land use agencies. As a lot of your board knows, through implementation of the Serp in our other two communities, these types of measures are really high priority for the committee. So the first is supporting projects that reduce vehicle miles traveled. So that's promoting walkability, transit connections, active transportation. And this would partner with all of the agencies that have sort of their hand in that in the Stockton community. So that's the Council of Governments, the city, county, Caltrans. LU2 is incentives for bike paths and infrastructure. So again, working with those same transportation agencies and using our incentives funding really to leverage or help support or provide match funding that's critically needed for these agencies to provide that infrastructure. LU3 is just generally integrating local and regional planning efforts with the Serp. This Community Emissions Reduction Program has very clear goals the steering committee has laid out. And we need to make sure that we integrate that with a lot of the goals and a lot of the projects that are already occurring in the city, in the county, with the Transformative Climate Communities efforts, all of those different efforts, making sure they're integrated. LU4 is understanding and mitigating impacts of algal blooms. That was one of the concerns that was brought up early on in working with the Community Steering Committee, and we would partner with local water agencies and other organizations to help address those concerns. And then FD1 is our fugitive dust measure. That's an enhanced enforcement measure of our Reg 8 or fugitive dust requirements, again, within specifically the community boundary. Two more slides here. This second to last one, this is regulatory and enforcement measures. So these measures, of course, target looking at regulation or enforcing current regulations. The first one is enhanced stationary source inspection frequency. And so this is for permitted sources within the boundary that have had emissions violations in the past 3 years. And this was a commitment that's actually in our other two Serps as well. SS2 is evaluation of stationary source rules to determine whether additional NOx or PM 2.5 reductions are possible. Again, kind of moving forward with some of the upcoming rule evaluations that your board is familiar with, and continuing, as always, to determine whether additional rules or reductions are possible. And then SS3 is expedited facility risk assessment and risk reduction under AB 2588, the Hotspots program. The two CARB measures here that you see actually are several measures that are included in the Serp under CARB's jurisdiction. The first is enhanced inspections for mobile source measures. So that's the truck and bus measure, anti-idling regulation. All of the commitments are outlined within the Serp that CARB has committed to specifically for the Stockton community based on feedback. And the second there are upcoming mobile source regulatory actions that are really statewide measures, statewide actions, but provide a benefit to the Stockton community. So that's advanced clean cars, the heavy duty vehicle inspection and maintenance, low NOx engine regulations, and small off-road engine amendments, to name a few. And then finally there, HD5, you might have been wondering why we were missing HD5 in the previous slide. It's because it's really an enforcement measure here. And this is actually enhanced enforcement of CARB's statewide anti-idling regulation with some commitment from the district to help support that effort. And then finally, residential wood burning. The first one is incentives to replace residential wood burning devices, and that incentives funding amount is $300,000 here. This measure is actually unique in the sense that we would provide the hotspots level of incentives funding to replace wood with natural gas or electric devices, although typically the rest of San Joaquin County is not a hotspot and typically is only eligible for our lower incentives amount. So this would be an increased incentives amount. And then RB2 and RB3 are both education outreach measures. One is to educate the public regarding harmful effects of residential wood burning smoke. And then the RB3 is educating the public about illegal residential open burning. So really targeting, when you saw that initial slide that Ryan showed about some of the main concerns in the community, open burning of trash and other material, outreach just specifically for that. And so with that, I will pass it back to Ryan Hayashi to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. All right. So the district has been successful in advocating for funding to support the implementation of AB 617 in Valley communities. And this includes the $32 million in the Community Air Protection State Incentive Funding allocated by the governing board in the district's 2021 budget to support the proposed community emission reduction strategies in the proposed Stockton Serp. As was shown in that earlier image that showed the sources of concern in the community, one of them definitely was the Port of Stockton. And so the Port of Stockton is the largest bulk port in California, and it's a major economic driver for the region. The Stockton community members were interested in addressing sources of air quality concern associated with the Port of Stockton as expressed in the community steering committee meetings. And the Port of Stockton has committed to working with the community to enhance understanding of emissions, evaluate and pursue clean air opportunities, and increase community engagement, which was initiated prior to AB 617. While the port was identified as a high priority concern, the Community Steering Committee recommended to not include proposed port-related emission reduction and partnership measures in the Community Emission Reduction Program. However, the district is committed to continuing to work with the port to address the community concerns there through this process. So the next steps include would be, upon approval, by your board, the district would submit the proposed Stockton Community Emission Reduction Program to the California Air Resources Board for their consideration and approval. The measures in the Community Emission Reduction Program may require additional public process and approval by your board. The incentive programs primarily rely on board-approved guidelines. New programs will be brought to your board for approval as developed. And new partnership measures that do not require new funding or additional resources authorized through the Community Emission Reduction Program approval through the Serp approval without further board action. Regulatory development outlined in the board-approved best available retrofit control technology schedule and attainment plans would commence with additional public process and may require future board approval, or would require future board approval. The Serp really establishes the framework for the implementation that we're going to be undertaking. Upon approval of the Serp by the district, by your board, and the California Air Resources Board, the district would work with the California Air Resources Board, other agencies, and community stakeholders to implement the measures that were included in the Community Emission Reduction Program. The Community Steering Committee will continue to meet regularly and provide ongoing feedback, and individual measures may need to be refined and funding amounts shifted to ensure effectiveness and success of the Community Emission Reduction Program, and must remain consistent with the board-adopted commitments. We will be reporting on an ongoing basis in implementing the community emission reduction measures. So today's recommendations are for the board to adopt the proposed community emission reduction program for AB 617 community of Stockton, authorize the chair to sign the attached resolution adopting the proposed community emission reduction program, direct staff to forward the adopted Stockton Community Emission Reduction Program and attached resolution to the California Air Resources Board for approval, and authorize the Executive Director, Air Pollution Control Officer to commence development and implementation of the specified measures included in the proposed Community Emission Reductions Program that fall within board-approved program guidelines, are currently approved to be funded through applicable state community air protection guidelines, and make changes to the 2021 incentive spending plan as necessary for the implementation of the proposed measures. And with that, I will turn it over to Samir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. I wanted to make a few just really quick closing comments. Really starting with a set of acknowledgments in terms of how this proposed community emission reduction program came to be, and now here before you for consideration for approval. First and foremost, it wouldn't be possible without the dedication and the time and energy spent by the Community Steering Committee that was meeting on a really regular basis, more frequently than anywhere else in the state, to really talk about these issues, develop with us and others the various measures that you heard about today. Its residents in the community, business representatives, community-based organizations, the city, the county, the port, a variety of representatives from schools and other stakeholders in the community. It was a very lively and a very well-attended process over the course of a year and about 3 to 4 months now. It actually started even before, initially with some even pre-official meetings and talking about these issues with a lot of the members of the community. So I really want to acknowledge the Community Steering Committee and all of their hard work. I want to thank the CARB staff as well. They've been there at every single meeting. They played a really important role in committing to various measures and then supporting in a variety of ways the various interactions that were occurring. The state and local agencies involved, the COG, Caltrans, the Housing Authority. As you can tell, there's a lot of folks that engage in these discussions because while the district prepares a plan like this, as Ryan talked about, none of this actually works without all the local partners being engaged, being at the table, and actually wanting to be a part of this process, because there's nothing about AB 617 that ultimately in any way would authorize us or compel any of these local partners to do any of the work that we just outlined. So I really want to extend appreciation for all of the local partners and really wanting to be a part of this process. I also want to recognize the facilitator, the Institute for Local Government. They're an excellent facilitator. They work very, very hard with us and with the Community Steering Committee to really make sure the voices are heard. And it's not always easy in these meetings to make sure there's a very diverse set of opinions and diverse set of issues that are being tackled. And so it takes a lot of skill sets to be able to really help facilitate these meetings and actually move these various issues forward. I also want to recognize the staff. I'm not going to go through the names. There's actually too many to list of various staff that are in these meetings, day in, day out, not just at the evening meetings, but in between, talking to individual steering committee members, working on the measures, evaluating, doing a lot of technical work, and really trying to support the process. It's very creative, very innovative, very different from what we typically do. And I think over the last couple of years in working in this program, we've really developed a lot of new skill sets, and really want to appreciate them and just commend them for their hard work. And then lastly, the governing board. I want to thank the board for being willing to really use a creative approach in responding to these new mandates, the AB 617 mandates. For example, the funding allocation that Ryan talked about, your board has actually set aside those funds to really meet this moment, actually have a plan before you with some specificity to it. You do that through the budgeting process. That's just one example of the many things that this board does to really respond to the 617 mandates and be able to deliver in these communities and really try to improve quality of life, improve air quality in these communities. So I think that's important to know. I really just want to make sure that the board is fully recognized for just being able to allow us to have the ability to bring back these types of plans before you. And with that, I just wanted to turn it back to you, Mr. Chair and board members, for discussion, and really appreciate the opportunity to bring this plan before the board.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to Brian and Jessica for your presentation today. Mayor Bissinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I read some of the public comments that were submitted, and I'm looking at, says, while the port was identified as a high priority concern, the steering committee recommended not to include them in the Serp. And looking at the top sources of concern, port operations, heavy duty trucks, train and railroad emissions were 3 of the 6 concerns. And I guess I'm trying to understand, and I'm assuming during public comments, why the port was excluded when they were obviously a source. There are definitely 3 of the 6, if not 4 or 5. I'm trying to understand that.
Yeah, Mayor Bissinger, that's a great question. And I think there's generally a desire, by the community and the port, and certainly the district, to really continue looking at the port-related emissions. But at the end of the day, in order for this program to be available as a tool for that interaction to happen, you have to have willing partners on the community level, the port level, district level, and others that would make some of these measures come to fruition. And unfortunately, the Community Steering Committee, through their consultative role as a committee, did decide that they did not want to, you really need that fundamental sort of component of that partnership for those measures to actually be a reality in a plan like this. And there was a lot of discussion around this issue, and ultimately a majority of the steering committee members just didn't feel like they wanted to include those measures in the plan. Now, you are referring to, there are a number of letters and comments that have come in support of this item today that do recognize a desire and a willingness and interest in having there be perhaps in this plan, some ability to actually have that interaction that was previously discussed with the steering committee. I just want to acknowledge those letters and comments. I think we'll see, they're in the public comment portion of this item, in terms of where some of the feedback may be on that. That's why I generally do believe, that there is interest in the community, and certainly what we've heard from the port, willingness to want to continue to engage, I would say generally speaking, at least on working on these various areas, related to clean air type measures. But if you don't have just to recap on the issue, if you don't have willing partners all around, including at the steering committee level, the 617 program wouldn't be able to provide the platform for that. It would have to be through other avenues. So at the end of the day, what we need is everybody committed to that level of partnership.
In the opinion of staff, if the port is not included in this and all the other actions that we've recommended, would this really get us where we want to go by excluding the port in this plan? I mean, we're talking about a huge entity, which obviously is one of the top sources of the pollution. And granted, we're under a time constraint here to get some things approved by Carb, but cutting them out or excluding them from the funding for locomotives, for heavy-duty trucks, charging operations, it just, to me, it's counterproductive. But what's the opinion of staff on that?
Yeah, I think my overall opinion on that, Mayor Bessinger, is that it certainly would be a missed opportunity to pursue some of the really innovative things that the port, and I do believe the community, generally speaking, are willing to support. They're looking, for example, at controlling ship emissions and maybe some of the cargo handling equipment. There's a variety of things that the port is interested in pursuing. I think 617 is a good avenue for that. Now, with that said, the port has been and will continue to pursue, I believe, a number of these measures, and we certainly would continue to support them. In fact, we partnered on zero emission technology in the past, a variety of Crane and other projects that have occurred at the port. So it's not to say that by not having them in this Serp, that there wouldn't be an ongoing interaction and effort to reduce air pollution from some of these various activities. But it certainly does, as I look at this plan, seem like another sort of added value in perhaps having, there be some of that interaction a little bit more formalized in this plan. But like I said before, we'd have to see a real commitment by the community steering committee, by the port, by all the necessary partners to really want to use the 617 program as the platform for that. Otherwise, it just simply doesn't work. And so that's kind of where, we, as Ryan mentioned in his slide, we would certainly continue to want to partner with the port, with the community to continue looking for those opportunities as far as port-related clean air projects. But it does seem like a missing component potentially in this plan, to not have that there. But if you don't have all the necessary ingredients or components for that to be successful, then it just doesn't work, and that's where it's at today.
I think your comment about missed opportunity is particularly important. We have modeled a lot of programs in this region to reduce pollution, and we're not the only port in the state of California, port area. And Long Beach, we have Los Angeles, we have other Bay Area ports, and if this can be a model that other air districts would like to follow if we can bring it in. So I kind of hate to see us throw the baby out with the bathwater and be short-sighted on it. That's all I have.
Very good, thank you. Dr. Pacheco-Warner.
Thank you. And I think echoing Samir, I can't thank the board enough for your trust in the district to do this work and, really to secure the funding, which is not a given in other communities. So I really thank you all for that, especially Board Member Fugazi for being such a champion of this community as well. And definitely thank you to staff for all of your hard work. I know that there's some really important lessons learned about just how resource and people intensive this work really is. And I applaud your initiatives that you've taken since this process began, and some that we'll be addressing today and some that we may be addressing later, that you really don't want to just say, good enough, that you're always working to improve. So thank you for your hard work for that. And I deeply want to thank every single resident that was involved in this process. And, I'm so impressed at the individual ability to just want to engage in such a comprehensive process where very few are actually experts at knowing how to address a community in its holistic way with poor issues, land use, right? All of these things are very complex. So thank you to each of the residents. And obviously, thank you to Carb as well, Carb staff, and so the rest of the board members know, I will continue in my role at Carb to continue to advocate for more resources so that other communities can also produce such stellar plans as the ones we see before you today. I did want to mention that, in addition to reading the letters, I did get to hear a little bit about why the port issue wasn't included. And I think, at least it was portrayed to me as there was some confusion on the side of the residents as to what they were voting for at the end of a very, very long meeting. And I think that, given that we've seen expression of interest in continuing to work with the port, by residents themselves through these letters, I too do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think we want to continue to give the opportunity for this community to engage this important player and also, commend the port for wanting to be engaged in this process as well, because like many other, independent authorities, they don't have to, right? And so I think this is a unique thing that I agree with Mayor Bessinger can be a model. So I would like, given that what I've heard about the confusion of what happened and then seeing the letters, I know that there are, and please let me know, but I think there's already some boilerplate that can be approved. I don't think we have to, if we wanted to amend it back in, I don't think we have to recreate, right now, any recommendation.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a quick response to Dr. Pacheco-Werner. Yeah, what Dr. Pacheco-Werner is referring to is that there were 4 specific measures that were developed over the period of quite a bit of time in discussion with the Community Steering Committee that were the specific measures that ultimately the Steering Committee decided, they were no longer interested in pursuing through the AB 617 ongoing interactions. And those measures are defined. They're out there in a draft. If it's the desire of the board, after you hear public comment and are as part of deliberation on this item, we're happy to summarize those measures to go over those with the board. But they range from community engagement commitments by the port in terms of continual dialogue with the community about what they're doing and some of the plans that they may have, to about a $5 million investment for the variety of technologies that were previously mentioned, the ship emissions, cargo handling, and truck-related emissions. And I would suggest at some point in today's deliberations that if it was the interest of the board, that we perhaps summarize some of those measures so you can actually see exactly what those consisted of. That's really the only reference point that we have in terms of what potential measures might be, because those were the ones that were discussed, deliberated on, and ultimately, written in the form of a draft potential measure for the steering committee to discuss, and that the port was willing to commit to actually engaging with us and the steering committee to pursue over the period of implementation of the plan. So we're happy to summarize those at the appropriate portion of this meeting, based on public comment and where the board wishes to deliberate on that specific issue.
Thanks, Mayor. On to Dr. Sheriffs.
Thank you, and certainly echoing all of the sentiments regarding the appreciation for the commitment, time, persistence of all the partners in this and bringing this forward. On the port issue, no plan is perfect. There's always something that could be added. It's unfortunate that this plan couldn't come forward to us with agreement, because as has been noted, it's a great opportunity. But it's not here today, and I'm not sure how we can get it in today, since it's not something that the community put forward. I won't say I hope, I look forward to the board being asked to approve a number of these really very creative and productive opportunities at the port. in the future. I do have one very different specific question regarding the fireplaces. And I understood from the presentation, and I hope I understood accurately, this would be targeted in more enhanced funding in the community, replacing wood burning devices, but replacing only with natural gas or electric. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. So again, leaving on the port note, I look forward to this board being able to approve, to look for ways to make some of those measures real. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sheriff. Mayor Pro Tem Preciado.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I just would like to thank everybody that got involved creating this plan, but I also looking forward that somehow, after the public comments, I did read some of the letters, and I think it is somehow, unfortunately, that the port was not included in the plan, but I think that also there's some confusion, and maybe after I heard public comments and more regards to that issue, I believe that somehow we need to leave it open after, if we decide to approve the plan today, leave it open so maybe we can add or implement, make some changes or add other things as necessary. As we know, we cannot have a missing link in order to work together in a country. Accomplish the goals that we need to reduce pollution in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fugazi.
Thank you. I'm so excited that we're talking about Stockton, and I too, I don't think you understand unless you've been there. And I went to a majority of the meetings. I sat back, and it was really tough to keep my mouth shut, but I wanted to hear the discussion. I wanted to be a part of it, because what you don't realize is these are my neighbors. These are people that I see at the park, in the store, on the Miracle Mile, downtown. I mean, these are my neighbors. Some of these people are my friends. And this was a really challenging effort, only because we had so many meetings, and we'd have more than one meeting a month. Sometimes we'd have more in 1 week. And there was a vote taken on the Serp, and then we came back the next week to try to iron out the issue with the port. And bottom line, something that all of us electeds understand is that the public wants accountability, answerability, transparency. These are things that they are hungry for. And, when you don't think you might get that, and that's what the result was. You threw the baby out with the bathwater, because you just quite weren't sure if you were going to get what you truly wanted. But I would say that those 26 residents and those 13 community group members, we would have not just the primary person, but the alternate, everybody participating, everybody speaking in these meetings. And what was once, an hour, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, going over 2.5 hours in the meeting, you had people dropping off. I mean, I'm a high school teacher. I'm trying to keep my kids engaged for 50 minutes at a time, and it's challenging, and it is for adults as well. And so I agree, no plan is perfect, and I'm looking forward to you hearing during the public comment period from some of the steering committee members, because they will tell you themselves what the experience was. I mean, letters are great too, but I want you to hear from them themselves as to what they understood. Because yes, while there was confusion by a couple, I mean, we didn't put up a slide of the votes, but again, like I said, we're excited about moving to the implementation phase. we don't want to lose any of this funding. We are ready to go. I would say from the people that I've talked to, very excited about moving on to the implementation. And so I'll probably have some comments after the public comments as well, but I'm looking forward to hearing from the people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Pereira.
Actually, I lowered my hand. I'll wait after public comment.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I would just, thank staff for all the process. And to anyone, Samir, whoever, the portion of the funding that kind of follows the port, can you identify how is that all from CARB? Is it specific to some of the programs? Is it a mix? What's the funding sources?
Yeah, so Ryan kind of gave a high-level overview of that funding, a little bit more specifics. Through advocacy, what we've been able to secure the last several years is what are called state community air protection incentive funds. And so all the funds that have been allocated to the Fresno, Shafter, and now for consideration by your board today, the Stockton Serp are all coming from these state funds known as community air protection funds, where technically speaking, actually all of these funds are eligible to be used actually in any defined low-income and disadvantaged communities throughout the state, in the Valley. Your board, and this is where part of my recognition was really focused on, has allocated these funds to these community emission reduction programs through the budgeting process, really dependent on the community coming together to pursue good measures that the board can consider at moments like these when the plans are brought before your board. So the $5 million that you're talking about for the port measures are all of these state community air protection funds, but there are many communities, many other projects throughout the Valley that would also qualify or be eligible for those funds. So at some point here, as the board deliberates and thinks about these port measures, it's just important to note that these aren't specifically allocated under the legislative or statutory strings that come attached to the funding to Stockton. These funds could be spent in many other communities. There's statutory timeframes and deadlines that are associated with these funds. It's important that we move forward with implementation, and we've been very clear throughout the process, and the Community Steering Committee understands this, that if we don't move forward and actually do something with these funds, that we would be in a position where we'd have to make sure that the funds are expended so we don't have to send them back to the state. So hopefully that answers your question.
That was the perfect answer, and my comment, to any AB 16 community or otherwise, is that, air quality funds are fleeting. We fight very hard to find access to these kinds of funding, and barriers are not good for us because we have very finite times for our emission reduction plans throughout the district, and so I really encourage this AB 17 community to really think hard about how quickly they react, and not forcing, and I understand how the public process works, but understand our responsibility in making sure that we meet our deadlines with respect to emission reduction plans throughout the district. And so with that, I see no further comment from the board. We'll move to public comment.
Okay, Matt Holmes.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, I couldn't find my button. Thank you. My name is Matt Holmes. I live in the study area, just south of Dameron, but I also ended up serving as Little Manila Rising's delegate to the Community Steering Committee. I have an asthmatic wife and a mother-in-law with chronic bronchitis resulting from her bouts with COVID-19. So, this process really matters to me, my two daughters. So I'm super grateful to have participated in the process. I won't lie, it wasn't easy. Your team was saddled with a difficult process, and there are even unruly partners in here that in many cases aren't within your jurisdiction. 617 has serious structural challenges that hopefully can be remedied in the future. Ryan's team tackled a Herculean challenge that's hampered by history, and frankly, there's an overwhelming lack of trust, so I salute anyone that's willing to wade into this space. A lot of the friction in the process can be chalked up to the novelty of it, regulatory jurisdictions, Carb in the Air District. There's some history going on there that I don't think we all understand. I think it's time to step out of the content and figure out how you work together. because it didn't help the process. But even more challenging than those bureaucratic issues, there's a historic inequality that should never be forced into an arbitrary timetable. This timetable was kept to, just under 15 months in a historic world-changing pandemic. Like, that should have been the first flag that we should have adjusted the timetable. And so I assure you, Carb's inability to provide any assurance to your team and our community that, even though liquidation deadlines are real, they're relative and they're specific to specific allocations. We all know that work started in Stockton before an allocation. Plenty of proof that money will come and continue to come. We should have never been threatened that our funding would be removed if we didn't, give everybody what they asked for the first time. Nobody on the committee was an obstructionist. There are people that don't agree with 617. The CPOs that I work for that are in this process, we've been exiled from whole circles of our fellow social and environmental justice nonprofits. We've also been exiled from private foundations for their funding for working with you on this. So we've taken a major hit being involved with the 617 process. Your seconds are moving faster than seconds, by the way. So we took a credibility hit. We aren't obstructionists. We had serious questions that weren't answered, and understandably, there was a lot going on. That's why I want to point out that there was unanimous approval. Your seconds are moving faster than seconds. You need to check on your process here.
You're wasting your time too, so please.
Approval of rolling oversight, and we had unanimous approval of a technical advisory group that can assist you and can assist this process. So I hope you'll take a look at that. That's our chance to address these port strategies. I live underneath that thing. Nobody didn't want to fund the port. I'm sorry you guys had to carry their history and their behavior. 22 out of 30 voting members voted to make that funding conditional, and they didn't respond to it until the last minute. We asked for 5 more days, and this submission deadline for this agenda trumped. So I just have to say that more time we can solve it. This is a living document. We were promised many times by staff members, and I believe them. I look forward to working with you all on this very unique plan. $30 million unanimously approved. Let's work on getting that other $5 million where it needs to go. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Nate Knott.
Yes, Nate Knott. I'm a voting resident member of the CSC, meaning I'm not representing a specific group or organization. First of all, I want to endorse the Citizens Advisory report made by Ryan Hayashi in item 6. I strongly endorse the comments and delivery of the report as made by the 3 members that have testified to you today. I will mention also that it's true that at the next to last major meeting, the CSC voted 29-0 to approve the Serp without port measures, knowing we were coming back 1 week later to discuss the port. I strongly endorse that there's many innovative, small, cumulative things in this project. One thing the Serp attempted to do, especially in these semi-strongly, somewhat anti-government times that we're in, was to go more with incentives and less with punitive measures, which were pretty well described in that itemized report that you saw earlier, because we want the citizens to buy into this and not resist these measures, since many people still resist climate change. So having said that, I can now maybe give you a citizen's perspective on the port issue, which has obviously been talked about greatly today. I was involved in 10 CSC regular meetings, 4 camp meetings, and 1 special meeting. That's 15 meetings. Over 60 hours of discussion, and I'll bet at least 30 of those hours are spent just on the Port of Stockton. Now, here's some specifics why the Port of Stockton was not voted in. It's an independent special district with independent funding, so they don't have to answer to a lot of things if they choose not to. And I don't mean any editorial comment by that. Number 2, this was pointed out many times. Most ships that come into the Port of Stockton have international jurisdiction and may not be enforceable by rules that this group could come up with or measures. Ships visit and frequency. An average ocean-going ship only visits the Port of Stockton 1 or 2 times a year. So you really can't do a per-ship enforcement of pollution. There's no hybrid tug technology. Unlike railroad locomotives, there's no electric or hybrid tugs. So that opportunity is not available. There's a problematic implementation of the one thing we talked about the most, which was bonnets or protective covers over smokestacks. The ships are different sizes, different lengths, different shaped smokestacks, and they move around the port while they're there. Having said that, there was no consensus after all those meetings, all those hours, and when you throw out the baby in the bathwater, I'm going to reverse that comment. Most of us voting residents were concerned that if we continued to talk about the port and come to no consensus, we'd lose the entire Serp, and we'd be throwing the whole Serp out with the baby bathwater. Main reason mainline locomotives were not put in there, by the way, is because they go out of city. Lastly, the Stockton port is a break bulk port, not a container port. So things that work elsewhere will not work in Stockton. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hector Olivares.
Hello, thank you. I'd just like to read a letter that was submitted to the board. Dear board members, on behalf of Catholic Charities Diocese of Stockton, the committee members signed on here, we want to share our support for Stockton's community emissions reduction plan. After a year-long process of many meetings with residents, community-based organizations, environmental justice groups, teachers, school reps, businesses, industries, and the Port of Stockton, we're finally here. We'd like to thank the hard work and dedication of Carb, Valley Air District, and institutes of local government throughout this planning process, especially in meeting facilitation and the quick requests from the steering committee. We especially want to thank the residents of the community steering committee for bringing their experience and their voice to this important process. We understand the decision by the steering committee to exclude the port air measures, but we realize now that the future of CSC amendments to include the port air measures would be difficult for the governing board and CARB to approve. In order to bring port air measures back into the Serp, we request 2 amendments be made by the governing board. This will allow the CSC to have continued discussions with the Port of Stockton on developing emission reduction strategies and to have green ports, as well as work together on building relationships with environmental justice organizations and the community. Given these reasons, we request that the district governing board consider an amendment to the existing Serp with the following. 1, the inclusion of funding of the $5 million strategy to explore potential incentives for the Port of Stockton to replace older heavy-duty diesel equipment and or install advanced control technologies beyond existing requirements. The district will work with the Port of Stockton, CARB, and the CSC to determine the types of equipment eligible for incentives in order to reduce emissions and residents' exposure to toxic and criteria air pollutants in and around the Port of Stockton. It should be noted that the first request amendment allows a chance for the CSC and the Port of Stockton to work together on developing mutual agreement strategies. It also is important to include language in the Serp that highlights the Port of Stockton's commitment to improving transparency and developing collaborations with community and environmental justice organizations. This is why we also request the governing board to include an amendment to the Serp that was included in the previous draft Serp. The amendment states as follows: collaborating to facilitate enhanced platforms for discussion and information sharing between the community and the Port of Stockton as port-related programs and projects are developed. These measures allow the CSC to adapt the Serp as needed to implement emission reduction strategies regarding port operations. We understand that relationship building takes time, and these measures will aid collaboration with the Port of Stockton and the CSC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janet Dietzkameh.
Thank you. We continue to see the value of AB 617 as it allows community members to identify their local hotspots, and monitoring near hotspots is imperative. The monitoring is very important. AB 617 allows recognition of disadvantaged communities being adversely affected by heavily polluted locations. Communities are very committed to resolve the air pollution problems that they have in their area. And I'm glad that there is consideration for those in the measures for protecting people in homes as well as in the schools. But I wonder how that is going to be done if a home does not have an HVAC system. I also want to notice that the bike paths and walking ideas are superb if the air is clean enough to go out and walk or ride a bike. Jessica presented some very outstanding measures in her presentation, and I I remember when Stockton was selected, that the first recognition of a location in Stockton is the port. And I am surprised that the port was, I guess it's been removed. I'm not sure that's exactly it. And I hope that somehow that can also have some inclusion, but do understand that the money is there and needs to be allocated. So thank you so much for your work on this project, the Stockton AB 617, and continuing working the Fresno and the Shafter parts of AB 617. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Elizabeth.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Mary Elizabeth, and I'm a voting resident of the steering committee. I've been working on port issues since June of 2019. I understand the disappointment with the port's speed to implement better public outreach or specifically responding to a list of community desires. Important recent improvements include making available video recordings and minutes without having to make individual public information requests, which was the case before. While there is more progress needed, I asked the board to set aside and include $5 million for port incentives to improve Stockton air quality. The timing of the final port plan inclusion was cut short. The discussions and the vote was rushed, with folks leaving after a 2-hour meeting before the final vote. This is a really important area, a source of emissions for the Stockton community, and I too would hate to lose this opportunity. Thank you for being open for the possibility of a future amendment, but I ask that that amendment be considered today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Connie Young.
Yes, hi, this is Connie Young again. So I congratulate all who worked on this plan. It sounds incredibly worthwhile and well thought out, and I hope that it achieves the intended effects of reducing emissions. How fortunate Stockton was to be selected for this program. However, I realize they were unfortunate for the reasons that they were selected, as were the other AB 617 communities that have been selected by this program. But what about the communities that haven't been selected, that were the runners-up with very similar pollution burdens? Although I realize that the 617 community projects and plans are going to set good examples that can be used by communities throughout the state and throughout the country, to me, the whole process seems very complicated, resource intensive when you look at the uncompensated time of community members, the compensated time of staff, and then the overall costs of developing and implementing this plan. So to me, it illustrates the need for a national policy that puts a price on many of the sources of both stationary and mobile sources of carbon pollution, all in one fell swoop. So so I definitely support this plan for Stockton. And again, I really commend all that worked on it. But in the future, I would suggest let's stop much of the pollution at its source rather than piecemeal at the community level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Taylor Williams.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Great.
My name is Taylor Williams. I'm a resident of the Stockton's AB 617 project area and a member of the 617 Community Steering Committee. Just appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my comments on this. First, I want to thank the Air District for shepherding this community Serp design process to fruition. And I also want to thank the members of the CSC with whom I've worked on this design process for the past year. It's been a tremendous lift of work. And part of that is inherent to the work itself, but a significant portion of our challenges emerged from issues of process, transparency, and methods of community engagement. So in the interest of the Air District improving its support of community leadership during our AB 617 process and that of other communities, I'd like to share a few of those challenges. One, making language available the night of a vote, sometimes 10 minutes before the vote was held, sometimes not at all. A lack of technical rigor in decision-making processes and the unavailability of continual technical support, lack of transparency, especially around funding. For instance, any discussion of Serp budget was relegated to the last few weeks of deliberation, as well as other non-transparent processes, including discussions with industry outside of the CSC meetings, equipment procurement, including monitoring equipment for the community air monitoring plan, and addition and selection of Serp strategies not clearly aligned with CSC expectations or priorities. And I do want to comment on the port. Port of Stockton is not just a stationary source of emissions. They're a neighbor with whom our community has endured a quite toxic relationship in more than a few ways over the last many decades. And we'll have to continue to engage with the port during this AB 617 process and well beyond it. Members of the CSC proposed conditions that would improve that relationship, make it more faithful to the community in the long term. And as a previous member noted, 22 voting members signed on to those conditions that would also fund the port for $5 million and include them in the Serp. But the port did not feel equipped to meet those conditions. So I hope this board will take many of the lessons we have learned over the past year into consideration during the AB 617 implementation process in Stockton and during the camp and Serp design phase with our neighbors in Kern County. One solution that I strenuously advocated for is an independent technical advisory group being an integral component of all decisions made by steering committees. Adoption of this TA group would lend credibility to the legislation's intent for faithful community leadership, but more importantly, it would equip members of CSCs with the knowledge to advocate for ourselves. Given the conditions of continued CSC oversight of the Serp's implementation and the inclusion of an independent technical advisory group, I look forward to these coming years of shaping a greener, more environmentally equitable city that preserves the dignity and health of my fellow community members. Grateful for this milestone in delivering that future we deserve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Cynthia Pinto Cabrera.
Hi, good morning. Am I coming out clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome, thank you. I submit the following comments on behalf of Dr. Catherine Gruber-Wright, Executive Director of the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition and Stockton Community Steering Committee member. I'm Cynthia Pinto Cabrera, CVAC Policy Assistant and Catherine's alternate on the Stockton CSC, and I also echo and support the following comments. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Thank you especially to my fellow CSC members who put in countless hours to reach an agreement on priorities despite an intensive process that lacked equity, transparency, and technical rigor. The Stockton CSC has been treated as an advisory board instead as a partner in decision-making, with a note to the lack of details given to the CSC members on how to participate in this meeting. Unless secured by CSC members, data and analysis on measures and monitoring, with the most notable being the information on the port, has been inadequate. Existing expertise on community-centered processes, as well as promising practices for pollution protection and reduction measures, must be leveraged for additional improvements. Instead, we were told to think outside the box, that money was no object, and then a few weeks before final adoption, we revisited the complex question of allocating incentive funding. Along with these many and other outstanding issues, I remain concerned about the lack of attention to enforcement at the largest stationary sources, as well as unaddressed conflicts of interest from CSC members representing the industry. Despite these obstacles, CSC members worked hard to ensure that the Stockton Serp before you today includes critical priorities of immediate protection for sensitive populations such as children. I am disappointed in the significant time and capacity invested in port-related issues that did not result in agreements. Though improvements must be made, I appreciate the efforts from the Valley Air District staff to incorporate some community priorities like increasing training for EV mechanics and compromising on measures such as prioritizing zero emissions over near zero to align with strategies with state priorities for electrification and to ensure that we are not reducing pollution while accelerating the climate crisis through the use of fossil gas. For successful implementation, I urge authentic partnership with the CSC to move all adopted measures forward efficiently and effectively. I look forward to solidifying a strong, collaborative, community-led process. I strongly support the creation of the technical advisory group selected by the CSC and urge additional attention to enforcement of stationary sources. As AB 617 progresses and expands, let's raise the bar for the recently selected Arbin Lamont Fuller Acres area in Kern County and apply these lessons learned to Fresno, Shafter, and Stockton while recognizing the unique aspects of each community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cynthia Lau.
Oh, hold on. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Hello? Oh, hi, my name is Cynthia Lau. I am here on behalf of the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. I would like to thank Valley Air and Carb for selecting Stockton as its third AB 617 community. EJCW voted yes to include the Port of Stockton measures into the Serp. Quite honestly, we were very perplexed and dismayed that our committee did not reach consensus and voted to not include the Port of Stockton measure. On behalf of EJCW, I'd like to reiterate that we stand by our yes vote, and we are committed and dedicated with working with the Valley Air and the Port of Stockton. And we would support any amendments to the Serp to include the Port of Stockton measures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Margot Prowse. Margot, I believe your microphone is muted. Can you hear us?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I couldn't find it. Hi, my name's Margot Prowse. I'm a retired RN. I live in the AB 617 district, and I was a resident on the CSC. This has been a very difficult process. I mean, it would be anyway, but this year of having to meet on Zoom has been extraordinary. Most of our meetings had 70 to 80 people on the meeting, and the Valley Air staff and the ILG facilitators were challenged to keep it focused, but the timing was difficult. Everything was delayed. Voices are delayed. People can't find their mute button, just like I couldn't find mine right now. And it's just been difficult. And I'm not going to whine about it. I'm just going to say that it was very difficult. That we came up with our Serp proposal, and it was unanimous, is exciting. And that was all submitted today, and Jessica outlined it. But I think there was some misrepresentation today saying that the CSC was no longer interested in the 4 port measures. It was not that people were not interested. We were getting close to figuring out a pathway to work through it, but time ran out. And I know our issues were already extended from December to March, but we were requesting extra time at that last meeting that could not be given. It simply could not, which is hard to understand. I did vote yes because this is our air, and I feel that the port being involved in having some of these incentives is important, but I believe that more time was necessary, and I think consensus could have been reached between the port and the CSC with more time. I appreciate Councilmember Fagazzi's comments on the need for transparency, which tends to be lacking, and I really encourage you to consider the proposed amendments as they've been put forth today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Wingfield? Mr. Wingfield, I believe you're on mute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, please continue.
Great. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address you here today. My name is Jeff Wingfield. I'm the Director of Environmental and Public Affairs at the Port of Stockton. Last year, I volunteered to serve on the steering committee for the AB 617 Stockton group, and it's been an honor to participate with this group. I've learned a great deal about the residents and the community, and most notably, their desire to connect and communicate more with the port. It's obvious from what I heard in these meetings that the desire is there, and the port is prepared to step up and provide the platform for more communication, transparency, and collaboration by creating a port outreach committee. I recently got coordinated with my board, and they too support this effort and plan to participate. I wanted to be a part of the steering committee for one reason, and that was to work with the community to identify measures that could reduce emissions further. The port started on the journey to clean up our equipment many years ago, but got a boost 2 years ago with a partnership with the Air District, acquiring 2 pieces of zero cargo handling equipment. And that humble beginning led us to acquire an additional 34 zero-emission heavy-duty forklifts and 1 railcar mover. In addition, we had already started an emission inventory that would allow us to develop an emission reduction plan and to prioritize each year to further reduce emissions by replacing, retrofitting, or controlling other sources at the port. We were well on our way to this goal prior to the AB 617 group, but now I'm hopeful that this group will serve as advocates and support efforts to further reduce emissions. Recently, the port measures were voted out of the Serp, and while I realize those measures would have resulted in reduced impacts to the community, it does not mean that the port won't continue to move forward and make progress on our own. We are committed to reducing emissions at the port and will continue to make that a priority. Thank you to Carb, the Air District, and the Steering Committee for your efforts over the past year. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a participant with the initials DV.
Hello, my name is Doug Vigil, and I'm with the the resident, and I too was a little confused with the Port of Stockton. A couple of times they in the middle of the meeting gave a lot of confusion regarding they didn't need they didn't need the money. They could have their own money. They could get what they want. They get what they don't need. They don't need us to get the money allocated to them and things like that. So it's really it's mainly the communication on their part to what we as the resident want them to open up to discuss their parenting, what they need, what they need the money for, and that's when everything started dropping down. They hung up. We had a following week, got upset. The following meeting, on top with an attitude, and so I pretty didn't quite understand why the Port of Stockton did not allow kept going to this meeting. So now I hear this. They decided they want to be part. Making resident to the community. Actually, I have never seen one met like I am as a resident involved in the community. So I really concerned what the big switch all of a sudden that Port has now wants the allocation from the steering committee all of a sudden, which I personally wasn't sure they didn't want it. So that's why the residents of the steering committee were confused about that. So it's not what that we at the steering committee, as a resident of Stockton, didn't know anything about. We just knew what they were trying to say. So it's just letting them, and that's what I've been seeing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I see no further public comment on this item.
Okay, very good. Thank you, and thanks to everyone for your public comments today. They're helpful in moving the process forward. Samir?
Yeah, I see Supervisor Chiesa has put his name on the board. Perhaps here are some board comments, but I did have some suggestions for further action on the item, but perhaps maybe recognizing the board members first.
Supervisor Chiesa.
I will be quick. So I absolutely love the incentive program. I'm very happy for the Stockton area because I think that expanding this program and to expand this program obviously deals with some of the problem. I want to thank Member Fugazi, Councilwoman, for doing a great job. She's been a total advocate of the rail and cleaning up the air. So thank you very much. The last thing I need to point out is we cannot let perfect be the enemy of good. People will come to the table if the time is now to start cleaning up the air. I think you start this process and not get bogged down in all the minutia. Eventually, the folks at the, with trying to figure out how to deal with the ships and the trucks coming in, they're going to come because there's incentive to do it. There's incentive money. But again, I think this is a good thing, and I appreciate everyone's hard work on this.
Thank you. Councilmember Fugazi.
Thank you. I appreciate all the public comment, the work of the Air Pollution Control District Board staff, Carb, ILG. I mean, this really was, as Margot pointed out, we routinely had 70 plus people participating in this effort during these calls. And yes, we were in a pandemic. And whether people were completely cognizant or not of the decisions that they were making, it's been this, we've been involved in this marathon, and here we are in the last stretch, and people are sprinting towards the finish line, and some people are puttering out. And we definitely, as I said earlier, want to move forward with this. But maybe, Samir, if we could at least put on the display what those measures were. The vote was 10 to 19, if I remember correctly, 10 for yes, 19 for no. In terms of the letters that have been referenced, there were alternates that were also included on those letters and people that weren't on the steering committee. And so, to really, truly paint a picture of this, I just want you all to realize that the Serp was unanimously approved the week before as we tried to find out, how we could include the port in this process. But what I love hearing from Jeff was that the port is committed. The port is going to continue working on this effort, that they want to be green. They said, brought up the transparency, collaboration, and community outreach, which is something that, again, I mentioned earlier is what we want. But maybe, Samir, if you could put up those measures, I will put it out, to the board to, muddle through these weeds. But we're still excited here in Stockton to be AB 617. So thank you.
Craig, Tom Wheeler.
Yep, you're on board next, so go ahead.
Oh, when I hit that little thing, it worked, huh?
It did.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. I really appreciate Councilman Fugazi for all she's done on this. I've been in those positions, and they're rough sometimes. It's better to sit back and listen to what everybody has to say. But, I just want everybody to know that, anything we pass like this is always a living document. It's just like counties and cities, general plans and stuff. They're in a constant move of improving daily almost. When rules come, we got to, change to make it fit those new rules. And this is what this is, and I know some people have some good ideas, but you guys have worked over a year on this. I don't want to hang it up. I think Councilman Fugazi should make the motion and serve deals if she feels like wanting to do it. Otherwise, I would. That, just saying that, we appreciate all the comments, and they will be addressed, and that we pass this as it is now and move forward, and everything else that comes along in your future meetings and what you bring back to us, we'll look at it and adopt those as they come forward, just like we do everything else we do on our decisions that we make. Every meeting we have, we always have something that seems like it's updating one of our rules. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. The presentation was great. And Craig, I got to leave at 11:30, and so thank you for everything today. It's been a great meeting. So.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor. And for clarity, Samir, would you like to kind of outline, because really this is the committee's report back to us. We don't really have, I don't believe, the authority to include or preclude anything that hasn't been accepted by the community, correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, perhaps I could try to summarize, some of what I've heard and perhaps some options that the board can consider. I think there's really two sort of main options that I can see right now for board discussion. One is you have the Serp proposed in front of you and with recommendations for approval. You can certainly act on that today. And then obviously the work would continue. We move to implementation phase, and as we continue working with the community and the port, as some of those various initiatives are implemented, if there's opportunities in the future, we can certainly keep the board updated on those and just really see what happens as that discussion and dialogue continues. That's one option. And as you heard from the port, as you heard from us, from the community, there's shared interest, I think, in just continuing to collaborate, I think, on that, at least that level. The other option that I think Councilmember Fugazi had mentioned, and one that I think is an option potentially for the board today, is to talk about those port measures. There's 4 port measures that were previously drafted, that were discussed at length, although clearly, you heard a lot of comments today about there needing to be more time. That's a pretty common theme, by the way, in the AB 617 program. These are very complex issues. I think generally we would actually agree that more time would benefit everybody on all of these initiatives related to AB 617. We could summarize those measures so that the board is aware of what those measures are. And I do think there's a potential for the board adding those measures potentially to the approved Serp with a funding allocation that goes behind them, under whatever board direction and guidance you would provide as part of that action. And I think that it is important to note the Community Steering Committee, it's a consultative body, so they actually don't have any direct authority over funding allocation, they don't actually approve per se, and what they do is they make recommendations to this board as to what you ultimately approve in this plan, any funding that's related to it. Although in this process, it's very important that we work closely with them, and that consultation role is a very important role. It's a partnership role. And in fact, we were actually listening and very much respecting their will, by them voting to not include those measures, and that's reflected in the Serp. So you bring up a good point, Mr. Chair, that I think in order for my recommendation on those port measures would be that, based on the comments that you're hearing today, and what I heard was pretty much unanimous support for trying to partner with the port. I would rely on that, and then board direction on those measures as to whether or not you want to consider adding those today. And if you don't do that today, again, there's a general commitment that I think you just heard from the port. But we do have slides ready that basically outline those port measures. We're happy to walk through those, as Councilmember Fugazi had mentioned, if that's something the board was willing to do, is actually talk about those and consider them today for potential inclusion, back into the Serp. And then we'd go back and I think a logical next step would be to present that back to the steering committee, as we report back on today's action. Not every steering committee member is here today, for example. We'd be happy to, provide what I hope to be a positive update that, based on everybody's requests, today, the board is willing to say act on that. And it's I have to say, it would be those measures, if the board does want to hear about them today, they all rely on the port volunteering wanting to implement those measures in collaboration with the community. And we do know that those measures, as previously drafted and discussed, were ones that the port were willing to do. So that's why I feel comfortable, if the board chooses to have this discussion, to add those measures, feel comfortable presenting them as such, and then we would report that back out to the committee. And again, this is an ongoing iterative process. If there isn't collaboration for whatever reason around those measures, of course, these are things that we'll have to resolve on an ongoing basis, working with our community steering committee. So I'll leave that, to I did hear a suggestion to at least present those, so I'm very happy to go over those really quickly with the board. We can summarize them. I don't think it'll take more than a couple of minutes to go through them. I think they're pretty straightforward. I'm happy to present those right now.
And then just with respect, I really want to respect the committee that took all of the time to do this. But in our day-to-day work, this would be, the port effort would be something we would do in our day-to-day emissions reduction efforts, whether it was part of the community or not, and it would be isolated from that as well. But I think it works well to use this process to move forward as well. But by consensus, I know I heard a number of members that would like to hear the presentation and possibly include this. Is that something that we can do by consensus? And I'll bring that back to the board. I'm not sure. Would we be able to do a roll call? Or if those on the screen could give me a thumbs up, and then.
Well, I can maybe provide some guidance.
Before we move forward, I do have a question.
Who is that?
Deborah Lewis from Los Banos.
Oh,
I do have a
sorry.
question before we move forward. And this is just procedural, and because I'm new on this board, I need clarification on this. There appears to be additional information that we want to include in a motion that's before us today. Are we capable of doing that, since that information was not agendized for this board to consider? And certainly, I'm not against this by any stretch of the imagination. I just want to know, are we able to do this logistically, since it wasn't part of the presentation and information for the board to consider? I think the option one that was presented to us sounds really good, because that way it could be brought back to us on a separate agenda item to be considered, rather than to try to dump a lot of things into the mix of what we have before us today. It's just cleaner to me to bring it back on a separate item and to bring it back as quickly as possible. And that's my statement.
Thank you. And we'll have board counsel maybe make a few comments here.
Yeah, sure, thanks. In terms of just presenting the additional measures that were discussed related to the port, I think you as the chair can just direct staff to show those measures, and you can have a discussion about it. And I do think that the agenda item as described fairly encompasses also including additional measures. The Brown Act just simply requires that you have a kind of a short, plain statement of the general subject matter of the item up for discussion. So it doesn't necessarily require, going in great detail, all the individual items that might be considered as part of that agenda item. So I think you have flexibility either way. And as the board chair, you can certainly direct staff to put those measures up on the screen and discuss them, and then include them in any motion or not as the board sees fit.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And thank you. So we'll go ahead and I think there's enough interest in this to make the presentation. So please, staff, go ahead.
All right, just want to go through these. There's 4 of them that we'll summarize here really, really quickly. And this first one, you'd heard some reference to this one as part of the comments that were read out loud. It's collaborating to facilitate enhanced platforms for discussion and information sharing between the community and the Port Stockton. I'm not going to read every word on the slide, but essentially here what we're talking about is the Port establishing what's called the Community Environmental Committee, the CEC. And it would have, play a number of different roles, but basically to build collaboration there with the community when it comes to understanding concerns, emissions at the port, various efforts at the port to reduce air pollution, and actually talking about projects within the port's jurisdiction. There's a list here of some of the things that came up during the Community Steering Committee discussions that could be potential projects for consideration by the committee. And they would do, some enhancements to community engagement, like using their website and other avenues for trying to improve the way they communicate what's going on at the port. And it would actually, as part of this measure, this is where there's some value, I think, by having it in the Serp. They would provide routine updates to the steering committee on various projects that are happening at the port. So there's a formality to that ongoing community engagement. The next three measures are really the emission reduction measures that were discussed throughout the various meetings. This one is focused on various equipment related to the rail yard distribution centers, basically cargo handling equipment with zero emissions priority. So there would be $2 million allocated towards this measure, and something that would be discussed on an ongoing basis as far as launching the program. There would actually, I don't think this was clear earlier, but there would be match funding. Wouldn't necessarily be 100% funded under these programs. So it's important to note as well that there's significant match requirements that go along with some of these programs, so that you actually leverage that funding to make even bigger investments. The next measure is related to tugboats. There are cleaner tugboat engines out there. Technology continues to develop. So this would be $1 million to continue cleaning up the tugboat fleet. And we do know that the ship-related emissions are a significant portion of the port's total emissions footprint. So I think between this measure and then P4, the last measure that I'll just mention here, they're both really aimed at looking at different ways to reduce emissions from ship activities at the port. And then I think when you combine these with the other measures that were in the plan that were already summarized by Ryan and Jessica, there were some truck-related, other incentive programs. You really try to hit at the various emission sources that are related to port activities. So those are the measures that were up until very recently included in the draft Serp. I think the board certainly is in a position to consider these measures, including the funding allocations today, or consider the other option, which is the continued dialogue with the community and with the port. I would make one comment related to that, which is once the board approves the community emission reduction program, it is important that we transition to implementation phase for this program. And what I mean by that is that if there is a desire by the board to continue to, say, update the plan at some point along the way here with, say, some port-related measures, what we don't want to see happen is more continued development on the Serp than the board actually really chooses to have occur, as opposed to implementation of the measures that are approved by the board. So I would only really related to that comment, I would recommend that there be very specific direction provided on if there is going to be room for discussion with the community related to the port activities, and at some point maybe coming back to the board with that. I would recommend very strongly that there be a very specific maybe return by April or something, because we are this is a very rigorous process that we have to go through in terms of implementing the Serp. The committee itself has to commit resources. So any of these measures that we're talking about here, like the community engagement, we actually would now start having meetings with the committee about these measures, and they're committing their time, our time, the port's time. So it's a very serious thing to actually include these measures in the plan. And we certainly don't want to, the goal here, now that we're 3 months late, is to actually have an approvable, implementable Serp. So I would just say under option one, that it's not just an open-ended discussion, forever before we come back with anything related to the port. I think the board needs to consider, really how to lay out the specific criteria for that option to make it workable. And with that, I'll stop talking there. I see that you've got a couple of board members that want to weigh in, so I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Fugazi.
I appreciate that, Samir, very much. And I actually think that what you last said is probably the best option for us in moving forward, making sure that we do continue on this next phase with implementation. But what we've heard over and over again, that there wasn't enough time. So I will make the motion to approve the Serp as it was presented, with a desire to update the plan, as you suggested, April, May at the latest, with the steering committee discussing potential changes, well, not changes, but addition with the port measures.
Councilmember Lewis, I'll be happy Councilmember Fugazi to second your motion.
And Mr. Chair, just if I could just ask for clarification, council members, just to make sure we understand direction on that. Part of that would also include continuing to set aside at least the opportunity for the $5 million in funding, just to make sure, because in the absence of acting on that today, that money would not actually be allocated to this plan. So that is something that if that was consistent with you, and I see you nodding, Councilman Fugazi, that just to make sure we're clear on that direction.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so I saw a thumbs up, and the second, is there a thumbs up on that as well? Councilmember Lewis? Or was that? Yep. Okay, thank you. Dr. Pacheco-Werner, do you still have comments, or would you like?
When I just want to make sure, so this, even setting aside the money, would still make it part of the Serp process? I just want to make sure that we're clear on that because of all of the CARB implications when it is part of the Serp process versus if it's not.
Yeah, if I understood the question correctly, let me know if I'm not answering the question
Please.
here. But what the way that I understand the motion is that we would, between now and May, see if we can come up with a set of port-related measures that also includes, for now at least, allocate, continuing to hold the $5 million, make it available to connect to those measures. In the absence of being able to develop those measures and bring them to the board, that money would no longer be available for
Right.
For those measures. So. We'll have to work, as far as CARB approval goes, we'll have to work with them, maybe as part of our transmittal letter to them, we submit the plan approved today and maybe noting that there's an ongoing discussion around the port and that we're hoping to be able to update the plan, with that particular set of measures just to provide a little bit of some clarity on where we are with that. But the plan, as adopted today, assuming the board adopts the plan, would be submitted, to CARB, and of course we would send any updates if the board were to make those updates in the future by May. Those would also be submitted back to CARB for their consideration. They have 4 months, by the way, to consider approval of our Serp. So this could all very well be done in time ahead of when they would ultimately take it to their board for approval. Your approval, I should say. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Sheriffs.
Yeah, no, thank you. The motion and amendment and your comments, Samir, clarify. We still need a date definite. We want to be sure we're doing this in a timely fashion so that CARB can consider it. And this seems like a very good outcome of the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So I see no further comments by the board at this point. Then, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Bessinger?
Yes.
Mr. Chiesa?
Yes.
Mr. Couch?
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Fugazi?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco-Werner?
Yes.
Mr. Pereira? Thank you. Mr. Preciado? Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Mr. Rickman? Mr. Rickman, can you hear me? I believe you're muted. Dr. Sheriffs?
With gratitude, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Shucklian?
Yes.
And I'll come back to Mr. Rickman.
I'm still here, so.
Oh, you are still here. Okay. Oh, well, Tom Wheeler, Mr. Wheeler.
I'm leaving, everybody. I wanted to make sure I got my vote in this. Absolutely, yes.
Thanks, Tom. Mr. Rickman?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Peterson?
I vote aye.
Motion passes. Item number 10 is update on AB 617 program and approve additional resources.
Still, good morning, everybody. Ryan Hashi, Deputy Air Pollution Control Officer, and I'm here to provide an update on the district's AB 617 program and seeking approval for additional resources in support of it. As a brief overview, in September 2017, state legislature and the governor extended cap and trade as part of the legislative package. That also included the creation of the AB 617 Community Air Protection Program. AB 617 program provides opportunities for bringing clean air resources to disadvantaged communities, building on significant emission reductions already achieved in the valley. Selected communities receive community air monitoring, community emission reduction programs, community clean air incentive funds. Your board has been proactive in responding to these new state mandates and working with valley communities. In September 2018, CARB selected 10 initial communities, including South Central Fresno and Shafter in 2019. And in 2019, Stockton was one of 3 additional selected communities. Since selection, community steering committees have been established, community air monitoring plans developed and put into place, community emission reduction programs developed for the communities in coordination with the community steering committees, and your board has adopted Serps for South Central Fresno and Shafter communities in September 2019, and I'm very excited for Stockton's to be approved today. The district has utilized bilingual community engagement to continue to collaborate with and support community steering committees, and this has included agenda setting meetings with community steering committee members, neutral facilitated monthly community steering committee meetings with interpretation, procedures to ensure meeting documents are translated and available to review prior to the meetings, and heavy involvement by partner agencies and organizations such as the California Air Resources Board, Department of Pesticide Regulation, cities, counties, councils of governments, utility companies, urban greening organizations, community nonprofits, and many others. It's included comprehensive and dedicated bilingual community web pages with tools to view real-time air quality data and maps of emission sources. It was the first in state to successfully transition to virtual online meetings to continue this very important work. It includes board-approved stipend program for volunteer resident community steering committee members. We do weekly check-ins with our Spanish-speaking CSC members to make sure that all their needs are being satisfied and they're able to fully engage in the development and implementation processes. And we've developed programs to lend laptop computers and provide internet access to CSC resident members. Just a few pictures of the wonderful steering committees that we have and our engagement with them through this process. Ongoing implementation includes development of new community-focused incentive programs and project plans using new CARB guidelines. To date, we have 5 project plans that are approved by the California Air Resources Board, and to date, we're the only region with any approved plans. In addition to the ones that have been approved, we have 5 additional project plans that are currently being reviewed by CARB and are awaiting approval. We've accelerated the progress to fulfillment of the truck reroute study in Fresno, launched alternatives to agricultural open burning, low emitter nut harvesting, residential and commercial zero emission lawn and garden grant programs. We've developed school filtration and electronic school bus programs. We've facilitated discussion between the Department of Pesticide Regulation, the California Air Resources Board, and then the Steering Committee on Pesticide Mitigation and Electronic Notification. And we've developed enhanced community engagement and air quality considerations regarding land use decisions by cities and counties. And the image to the right shows the time and the effort that's been put into working with the community steering committee members, the 84 that we have between Fresno and Shafter. We've had 60 meetings with them and developed 97 measures to reduce emissions and reduce exposure. We've developed programs for urban greening and vegetative barriers, and we've been performing regulatory work, including expedited review of district rules with added focus on sources of concern in the communities. We've provided energy efficiency education and shared opportunities for community residents to take advantage of available programs. We've increased outreach to provide compliance assistance through social media, billboards, and other media. We've enhanced enforcement of district, state, and federal regulations, and we focused air quality-related outreach to promote available clean air programs and educate the community regarding tools to protect themselves during poor air quality episodes. The district has developed and is now implementing community air monitoring in consultation with the community steering committees. The monitoring is aimed at improving understanding of community-level air quality, track trends, support implementation of emission reduction measures. Deployment of extensive stationary and mobile air monitoring equipment in both South Central Fresno and Shafter communities has taken place. Community air monitoring data is available on a real-time basis, and air monitoring summaries are available bilingually on community web pages. And the image on the right is just an example of some of the data that's available to each of the communities. We also provide regular updates to the CSC members and take feedback and use it to help inform our air monitoring activities within the communities. The district has seen a significant increase in workload associated with AB 617 and incentive program implementation, including the grant program administration, the community engagement, community monitoring, and community emission reduction programs. As a result of the program, the district has received significant new state community air protection funding, and the state's funding legislation and guidelines impose strict requirements and deadlines for encumbrance and liquidation of these funds, as you've heard earlier today. Ongoing work in implementing community air monitoring in the community emission reduction programs in South Central Fresno and Shafter and Stockton is going to be continue to be a heavy load. The addition of Arvin Lamont will require significant additional work to develop and implement the new program, new community air monitoring plan, and the community emission reductions program. The district has been allocated significant state community air protection funds in recent years. We need to continue to ensure a high degree of public accountability for effective, efficient, and judicious expenditure of these public funds. And we'll have to work with community to establish partnership with stakeholders and conduct outreach to Valley residents, agencies, businesses, and other community stakeholders to ensure strong program participation. As mentioned, we continue to plan, deploy, and maintain a community air monitoring network in the selected AB 617 communities, and need to analyze data on an ongoing basis and make information easily accessible on the community web pages to the community stakeholders. And there's in the middle is an example of one of the reports that we routinely send out to the community steering committee members to keep them updated on the progress. AB 617 requires that districts adopt community emission reduction programs containing strategies aimed at reducing emissions and exposure burdens to residents in these communities within 1 year of being selected. The district works in close coordination with CARB, cities, counties, and other agencies in consultation with community steering committees. The tasks involved in preparing SERPs include analyzing emission monitoring information, modeling and air quality analysis, source emissions inventory and attribution, and identification of effective measures to reduce emissions from community sources of concern. And all of this is done, as we talked about, through a robust public engagement process. AB 617 requires uniform statewide system for reporting inventories for criteria and toxic emissions from stationary sources to the public. In 2020, CARB adopted new criteria air pollutant and toxic air contaminant reporting regulation that requires increased collection of emissions inventory information from stationary sources. This is a significant new workload to perform the outreach, collect and validate additional information from these existing and new sources. And we will continue to work closely with stakeholders to ensure efficient implementation of these new requirements. AB 617 also requires non-attainment districts to adopt expedited, best available retrofit control technology schedules for facilities subject to the cap and trade. That's also significant work necessary to demonstrate that our existing rules either meet BARC requirements or identify potential gaps. And we must share these findings with the California Resources Board as they compile what they call a BARC statewide clearinghouse. AB 617 requires districts to develop the community emission reduction programs in consultation with the state board, individuals, community-based organizations, affected sources, and local government bodies in the affected community. We've been utilizing the California Air Resources Board's AB 617 blueprint and the board adopted criteria for establishing community steering committees, which includes which states that the community steering committees serve in a consultative role to the district to help understand the community concerns and support community air monitoring plans and emission reduction programs. The majority of community steering committees members must be residents, and the community steering committees are established by the executive director and air pollution control officer upon selection of the communities by the California Air Resources Board. There's extensive work that's required to support the numerous highly attended evening public community steering committee meetings, as you can imagine. As you heard, with 70, 80 plus people in attendance often at those meetings. So the numerous workshops, public meetings, community forums to educate and the public and solicit suggestions and feedbacks on a wide variety of issues. And we talked a little bit about utilization of expert meeting related service providers to ensure that we are successful in engaging with the community through these processes. There's a significant need for bilingual interpretation and translation skills to really be able to fully engage with our members whose primary language is not English, and so making sure that we have that is very important. We continue to support, or we continue to see a high level of resident CSC member participation through the board-approved stipend program. To date, last year, there was approximately $21,000 spent on the stipends to the community resident members. Lastly, we engage with Valley residents and businesses to find applicants for these new and innovative community clean air projects to see the community emission reduction programs to fulfillment. Prior to any consideration of any proposed staffing enhancement, the district explored all possible efficiency, streamlining, and integration with existing functions through the zero-based budgeting process that I know many of you are very familiar with, including automation, streamlining, and efficiency measures. To the maximum extent possible, we're going to use existing staff to absorb a large portion of the work associated with the new grant dollars and new AB 617 mandates. However, additional staffing is necessary for effective and timely investment of new grant funds in the communities and addressing the AB 617 mandates. And so the proposed staffing enhancements would include a new director of community strategies and resources who would provide leadership, guidance, and support with respect to AB 617 implementation, provide lead direction and coordination of community level work between the district's departments, partner agencies, community stakeholders. We would look to reclassify one public education administrator position to a program manager, which would provide a higher level of management oversight of AB 617 program engagement, including community steering committee support and oversight of logistical and language needs. We'd look to add one new senior air quality specialist, which would provide lead support in implementing AB 617 community emission reduction programs and help develop and implement those. We'd also look for a new bilingual senior air quality educational representative who would provide bilingual outreach support to meet our translation, interpretation, and logistical needs of the AB 617 program and other community engagement efforts. We'd look for one new senior accountant, which would provide grant funding, administration through fiscal oversight, and financial reporting, and a new programmer analyst to help build and maintain the new public-facing grant and other service portals in the community level air quality information in support of AB 617 and other grant and other district programs. So the district recommends to amend the district's position control list by reclassifying a public education administrator to a program manager and adding director of community strategies and resources, a senior air quality representative bilingual, senior accountant, senior air quality specialist, and a programmer analyst. And adopt a budget resolution to amend the district's 2021 district budget to appropriate the additional resources to support the AB 617 program. The fiscal impact would be salaries and benefits for the proposed staffing for the remainder of this fiscal year would be estimated at $183,000 and $240, and we'd utilize available state implementation and grant administration funding. The final recommendation is to authorize and direct the executive director to negotiate and enter into agreements for AB 617 implementation funds and make administrative changes as necessary. And with that, I will turn it over to Samir.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, board members, just wanted to make a closing comment. As you know, we've been integrating and growing this program, primarily through existing staffing. We made some adjustments. It's been well over 3 years now that we've been implementing this program. We started with 2 communities, went to 3, now to 4. And I think there's really a twofold benefit with what I hope you see are very strategic recommendations when it comes to staffing. Number one, I think that these programs, as you heard with the Stockton implementation, but now with Arvin and Lamont, and we also have a lot of work going on in Shafter and Fresno, they do require some major attention when it comes to the partnership building, interacting with many cities, many counties, port, obviously the community steering committees, that requires, quite a bit of oversight and some, executive level attention to those issues. It's currently being handled actually by existing executive managers, whether it's in permitting or enforcement or other programs. And I think that leads me to my second benefit on this is that, we really need to be cautious as especially given that we have the state funding available for these positions between the grant administrative dollars and the implementation funding, cautious that, we're not cannibalizing other programs to ensure that this work, moves forward. And I think we can deliver even better in the communities by having some of these positions with even better accountability, better oversight, while also making sure that all of our other core programs are functioning effectively at the high standards that the board expects and maintaining those high standards across the board. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to the board for discussion consideration.
Okay, thank you. Okay, first up, Mayor Bessinger.
I'm in support of this. I think it's important, and I realize the administrative burden that the 617 spread out geographically as much as it is. We talked about bilingual. Other than Spanish, are we considering any other communities? I know, especially if we're talking about the trucking community, the Sikh community is predominant in a lot of the trucking. Are there any other languages or groups that we need to address?
So the multilingual aspect of the engagement that we do will extend well beyond this recommended position, and we already have some bilingual capacity here. This would be focused primarily on Spanish here in the context of this position, because that's the largest need that we have, but we certainly have responded and continue to grow our response to, whether it's Sikh or whether it's, Hmong or other, I would say that's another significant population as far as addressing those needs. So that is something that we continue to, and we find other ways to address those issues. We actually, there's interpretation services that we use or translation services. Whenever those needs arise, we actually make those available and actually have incorporated those into our ongoing engagement. I think this would actually, one thing we didn't note here, but I think there would be some savings actually by having increased bilingual capacity. We wouldn't have to rely as much on some of the outsourced interpretation, say for this particular position. That's something, that certainly is a benefit of that. But I just want to make sure, it was understood that yes, there are other multilingual, needs, and we do have other mechanisms for trying to address those needs. They're not as significant as I think the Spanish needs are, but they're just in terms of the breadth of that need across the valley, but we certainly want to be responsive to that when we see it in different communities.
And when you have challenges with specific groups, I think members of the board have connections in those communities, and we can help you out there.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that.
Thank you. On to Supervisor Mendez.
Yeah, I'm like Mayor Bessinger. I'm for this. Can you explain not cannibalizing other programs? Not that you're a cannibal.
That was not sure if that was the best adjective to use, but yeah, no. What I mean by that is that we have a very high performing agency, as you all know, and I very much look forward to continuing to share those experiences with some of the relatively newer board members, where everything from permitting to enforcement to our grant program administration, are really leading programs when it comes to other air districts and other public agencies. But that relies very heavily on having a dynamic and committed, say, management team, and also just a set of staffing that are able to deliver on those programs. And so right now, as you heard from Ryan at the executive level, but then also with some of these key positions, what you're seeing is obviously many of these important staffers working from existing programs that also need all of their full attention, and certainly new mandates and new workload and other requirements associated with those programs. And so I think by providing this level of enhancement, you also strengthen the implementation of other important programs that are also important to communities in terms of delivering all the high expectations to the business community, to the board. So we do want to make sure, especially at this pivotal moment with a new plan just adopted, new community that we're working on, that it is an opportunity, I think, to make sure that while it's worked well, I think to now, we want to be careful with this moving forward, that we're not impacting the existing programs.
Okay, I just want to make sure this isn't a unfunded mandate that the state is shorting us on. It appears to be, but, we need to keep reminding the state that if we're going to do these deals, that they fully fund them.
No, I agree,
So we can
Supervisor.
attempt to do them right.
Yeah, and I think on that point, I just want to note that while we have been successful, in receiving funding in this current year and the new budget, there's funding now as well. That's good for the next couple of years of implementation. It is an ongoing advocacy. It's an ongoing discussion to make sure that it doesn't become or isn't an unfunded mandate. And I can tell you that we would have to operate within our means on this program, and so that is something that with the addition of a new community, that we have to be very aware and cautious of. And of course, we're tailoring our programs to make sure that we're delivering the best that we can, but obviously within the resources that we also have. So that is an ongoing discussion. We obviously every budget year we talk about those issues, and it's something that we keep an eye on very closely.
Thank you.
Great. Member Fugazi.
Thank you. I am very happy to see this in our agenda today. And I will tell you that seeing Ryan and the work that he's done, and knowing that I'm just saying staff in general, you figure we've had an excess of 20 meetings in Stockton, 2.5 hours, plus you have a debrief, preparation, all of that. I mean, this is a lot of work. And I don't know what his other job is with the Air District, but I know that AB 617 probably has taken a majority of his time, as well as answering calls and emails from steering committee members, partners, the city of Stockton, the county, the port, all that. I'm definitely in support of this. I think we should have probably done it sooner, but we learn as we grow. And also, in addition, I will let you guys know that we had a member of our steering committee that was deaf, which required to have a sign language translator. And sign language translators are not inexpensive, and we want to make sure that we're inclusive of all members of our community. So I'm very much in support of this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Reyes.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to mention that this definitely helps address some of the public comments in ways to help strengthen this program. And it's a big platform, and for some people, it's the first platform they'll be able to enter into. And if we do this right, growth is guaranteed with these programs, and we should expect to have to revisit this very subject if we do it right and that growth happens, and if not, guarantee or schedule a time to look at it again, because at the rate things are progressing, and as other communities join, I think it's something we can expect. And by programming that and addressing that, we can help remind the state and other funding sources of the need for the funding to keep coming our way. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pacheco-Warner.
Just wanted to comment more for the board that I will definitely, and I have already stated the need for, additional resources for the district to continue to do this work. And I think that, another plan approved today is evidence of how this is the district to invest in terms of getting your money's worth for your resources. So thank you all for your hard work.
All right, very good. I see no further comments. Action by the board.
Move to approve.
Very good.
Second.
All righty, we have motion and second. Madam Clerk.
We need to call for public comment through the chair.
Of course we do.
I do have Mr. Manuel Cunha.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, you definitely. I would like to make a comment about a money item. Thank you very much again. A great discussion from the entire, and I want to thank Ryan and all of his team, and Samir and the board for their third, and we're going to be having a fourth year of the 617. And absolutely, I think, Buddy, I agree. My concern would be how much more do we taxi the staff? Because as you know, as a board, you just adopted one of the most difficult, strongest ag burn rules in the country, which is going to take a lot of time for staff and us and everybody. So all of these things take a lot of time and effort. So I think, Samir, you guys are being very, very conservative on your amount and the staff time specifically for this, because this is more complex, as you noted with the Port of the Port of Stockton, excuse me. So those issues are going to take staff time. So I do really support this effort and moving forward and evaluating. Again, the state should help pay for these items. I don't think it should be put on our other programs. Again, we support this move with having the staff and making our staff to where they can do other things that they've been doing back to some of those items. So again, Mr. Chairman, we support the recommendation of Samir to the board and hope the board to approve. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Janet Dietzkameh.
Thank you. I very much appreciate this discussion. I very much support that you approve this. And I thank you so much for the work you're doing on this. AB 617 is very important because it is community driven. The community recognizes areas that need attention. The community gives the input on what the community needs. Thank you for this, and I hope it's approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I see no further public comment on this item.
And then we can go ahead and call.
Mr. Bessinger?
Yes.
Mr. Chiesa?
Yes.
Mr. Couch? Mr. Couch, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I'm here. Yes.
There you are. Thank you. Ms. Fugazi?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Dr. Pacheco Werner?
Yes.
Mr. Pereira was having technical difficulties and dropped off the meeting. Mr. Preciado?
Yes.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Mr. Rickman? Mr. Rickman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Sheriffs?
Yes.
Ms. Shucklian?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
And I vote aye.
Motion passes. Item number 11 is verbal report on California Air Resources Board activities.
Thank you so much. So, I attended my first board meeting. It was a short 13-hour meeting, realized I got to do a lot of physical and mental conditioning for that level. But
Body armor.
Yes. So really, really happy to report. Obviously, the approval. I think that you'll see some of the highlights here, but I think most relevant to our board, really, the the approval of the new 617 community within our district, which is the Arvent Lamont community, and just had a number of residents and other community stakeholders support that. So I'm glad that that was approved. And as well, as I mentioned in my previous comments, I did make comments in there to continue to increase the resources for air districts to do these to bring on these additional communities. And then obviously the San Joaquin Valley 2020 Ag Burning Assessment. I think maybe Samir, you could provide a little bit more in depth in terms of what the next steps are. But we did receive the commitment by Carb to continue to partner with the district to reduce burning at the pace needed to meet the 2025 deadline that was set by Carb as a target to a near complete phase out of agricultural burning, and to do a number of activities over the next couple of months, which does include holding a summit of non-burning alternatives, and to do a lot of outreach and really also the establishing a clean biomass and bioenergy collaborative to really make sure that the agricultural industry has all of the tools in its toolbox to meet this target, as well as continue to, Carb also committed to working with the district and other stakeholders to push for more federal and state level funding to really make this target come into fruition in a way that the agricultural community can actually sustain. So I think lots of important work ahead on that, and I think that that there was definitely the commitment by Carb by giving a lot of its leverage to the executive officer to work directly with the district on these measures, that this will move forward and that we will have clarity on the feasibility of how this happens quite quickly. My understanding is by the end of the summer that we should know where a lot of these mitigation strategies and funding are going, so that we can make a further assessment then as to what the feasibility of this target. So, and in addition, I will say that something other relevant to the valley is that there was expressed interest as a couple of research contracts were approved on different matters relating to air quality, that there was an expressed interest to work with more San Joaquin Valley-based educational institutions for some of those research projects and really leveraging on the expertise that is also here in the Valley. So I was very, very pleased to hear that, and hope to see how so many of the talented researchers up and down the Valley can continue to contribute to CARB research programs. And that's my summary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 12 is Executive Director APCO comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. I'll be brief, but I do want to hit on the ag burn action by Carb really quick on this February, and just highlight a little bit of what the next steps are in that. And I wanted to thank Dr. Pacheco-Werner actually for playing a really important role during the board meeting and representing San Joaquin Valley and just helping land, I think that item, and it's to where it's now something that between now and August, it is something that we'll be working on. And the plan would be to return to your board with some updated strategies that now reflect the action that was taken by the CARB board. Dr. Pacheco-Werner, I think, hit on the various facets of that, but it was a pretty extensive strategy. A lot of it related to collaborating on energy policy, a summit to continue discussing alternatives. I think probably one of the most important components that is something that we're now working on is generating some funding by the state to back up the new state direction that was done, obviously in collaboration with with us. But I think the funding that's going to support these alternatives across a variety of fronts is going to be a very important, what I hope to be a positive development along the way as we develop the strategy. And it would be something that needs to come back to the board by August. There was a 6-month concurrence with the board's report as part of this action, so that lasts through August. And then at that point, CARB would need to concur on whatever the updated strategy is that, like Dr. Pacheco-Werner mentioned, by the beginning of 2025, by the end of 2024, would basically be a near complete phase out of agricultural open burning. So that is something that we're working on, and we will continue to keep the board updated on that as it develops. And obviously, we'll be working with Valley stakeholders to kind of flesh out the details that would go into that strategy that we return to your board. I just wanted to mention a couple of other quick things. They're important enough, I think, even at this late in the meeting, for me to make sure you're aware of them. One of them is there is an important evaluation that's been conducted by the Alaska Department of Environmental Regulation, I believe they're called. It's ADEC, but I don't know what the C stands for. And NESCOM, which is an association of Eastern kind of air agencies. They've been looking at wood stove certification and emissions. So a lot of these devices that are sold out there, as replacements for some of the existing devices, there's some issues that they're finding in some of the certification processes. It's really early to know what that means. But I just wanted to make sure, to the extent the board hears about this issue, there's been a number of public presentations, and there's a lot of folks that are kind of interested in what this means. And so it's with EPA right now. They're taking a look at that. They're the ones who provide the certification procedures, and I oversee that whole program. I just wanted to make sure this was on your radar. And if you get any questions about this issue, please forward them to me. I'm happy to respond to those. But we are taking a look at this and are following it very closely to see if there's any impacts to the implementation of our residential wood burning strategy. Based on what we've seen so far, it's not a significant impact. Not a lot of our devices are part of this discussion, but we'll have to see as this plays out. Then lastly, I just want to let you know that we are continuing to evaluate as COVID-19, the pandemic develops, and as vaccinations and other health related recommendations are implemented. We're continually evaluating our operations to make sure that we're up to speed on where things are, and we'll keep the board updated on meeting format, for example, with our board meetings and other important district operations as they relate to the pandemic response and our emergency policy related to that. At this point, as you saw today, it's still a Zoom-based meeting, but as this develops, we'll it's a month-to-month right now in terms of how we operate as it relates to the pandemic. So we'll keep you updated on that. And that's it for my updates, Mr. Chair, board members. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 13 is governing board member comments.
Mayor Bessinger.
I just have a quick thing to say. I was out for dinner the other night, and I saw our former director, Sayed, and he looked great, and he looked happy. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great. Further comments? Supervisor Mendez.
I normally wouldn't. Everybody knows my favorite part of the meeting's when it's over, but one of the things, everybody has, I'm a person that has no hobbies, so one of the things that I like that I've done, probably done 50 years work of, basically statistical analysis on the local rivers. And water in California, period, but, and probably the river I know best is the Kings. And actually that river was, there's some statistical analysis done between 1850 and 1895, but it's not real specific. From about 1895 on, the actual runoff of the river has been actually gauged and recorded. Now there's kind of I like interesting facts. There's a statistical average on the average runoff. And since 1950, there's only been 1 year that fell directly in the statistical average. Every other year was either 100,000 acre feet north or south of that number. So what's normal on rivers in the San Joaquin Valley, especially the southern rivers, normal is not normal. Normal is abnormal. And the normal thing that happens in the valley is we either have a drought or we have a flood. And this goes back clear to, a lot of people forget you have to be in a small room of people that know. Actually, one of the worst severe droughts and floods we ever had in the state were between 1855 and 1863. We had a long drought, a drought long enough that the Tulare Lake actually shrank. There's some analysis that was done of the old lake, and it actually shrank during that period. And in 1862, the fall of 1862, we had so much rain through that 1862-63 year that the state government moved out of Sacramento. So it was a very severe flood, maybe one of the worst in California history. So these are just facts, and you can look in the historical record and they're there. So normal is not normal. Weather being normal, and you see that every day. Everybody wants to go back to a statistical normal. That's not normal. For the San Joaquin Valley, that's abnormal. So that's what I got to say.
Thanks. Mayor Preciado.
Yes, my closing comments will be, I just want to extend my gratitude and to everyone who participated in this process for the Stockton area for AB 617, also Samir and all the staff that been working very, very hard to get that plan accomplished. And, I just want to, through this pandemic, as communities, counties are opening up, we still need to move forward and continue to work as a team. And I just want to say thanks to everybody and still to remember that we still need to keep our distance and still try to be safe and be considerate of our neighbors. Thank you.
Supervisor Shucklian.
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe on the next agenda, everybody could bring a suggested hobby for Supervisor Mendez.
Gee, thanks. You really want to start that?
I just want to say something. I have 13 girl cousins that I grew up with. There was more girl cousins in our family by long. So, I mean, Amy's just like one of the gang. So I'm so used to it. Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome. Buddy.
You act like you could be related to me.
Well, we'll talk sometime. I'll tell you, we might have been by marriage at one point.
All righty. Any further comments to come before the board? Seeing none, thank you all for joining. And again, thanks for everyone's input today on the from the Stockton area. And we will see you again next month. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.